out this evening for a variety of reasons. I understand that. What I will try to do, I'll get with John before the evening's over. He actually tried to email me a link a little while back, and in my own information technology stupidity, IT challenged, I was not able to make the link work. But obviously there is going to be a way for us to try to get to our evening's class, a link where we can go see the tape. For those of you that want to either review it, or you didn't get enough insanity in one night, you know, or those of you who are not here now that want to look at it, or you're here now and you're not going to be later, but there's going to be a way to do that, and we'll see if I can learn how to do it, and so you don't have to scout around finding that. So you just email me directly, and I'll learn what we need to learn. So let me try to give you an overview of my notes that I have laid out in front of me, and then tell you what I'm expecting tonight, and then I'll open the floor to y'all for a while. Last week, we did motivation. Well, we didn't do all of it, but we did at motivation. I have some notes from my own continual reading in the last couple of weeks, right out of Maslow's, probably his latest book is called Maslow on Management, which is a rewrite of a book that he called Eutychian Management, and I think he changed the title because nobody knew what Eutychian Management was, and it wasn't making enough sales, and so they had to market things a little bit different. But prior to that, when he started getting into his, quote, higher order needs, he came out with something called The Farther Reaches of Human Nature, and in the latter parts of that book, that which I have been calling metaphysical needs, moving beyond sort of those physical and social needs, he actually began to use the word transcendence. And so last week I did a bunch of reading on that. So I've got some notes that I may throw at us on that. And interestingly enough, it really, if I'm using words to describe things, if you use the musical word resonate, does people understand that word? It's like it goes like this, and it fits. It's like you feel some sense of, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. Western music resonates according to certain scales, and it reaches a resolution. Like if you go da 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 da, and you know, oh, that's really comfortable, and you got this, and you feel good about that. And other music doesn't quite do it that way, and you create this sense of like something going on if you da 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 da. It's like, hey, could you just finish that? Could you play that last note? And so Maslow's work tends to talk about how at some point that there is this sense of like, that balance in the whole thing, not just one piece. And Csikszentmihalyi's work that I've been reading on talks about that, where that fits in the great scheme of things is a question about whether or not organizations, as we are studying them, whether it's a public one or a private one or a big one or a little one, are shifting in the way that they work, or the way that people are inside of them and outside of them, and all of that. And there's a different way of looking at that. There's a struggle. So I'll talk a little bit about that at some point. And how far I have got in my classes with those of you that are from the undergraduate days in something called general systems theory. I tend to dance around some of that stuff in many of my classes, but tonight I'm going to talk about some characteristics of what could be called an open system. And in my mind, the organizations that we're looking at and playing with, or that you're going to be a part of in the future, are not closed. Although some people would say, well, I'm sufficient unto myself, but there's always this interaction going on. And so what does that do? What do we know about that? What do we not know about that? And how does that impact how we can improve or not improve that? Along the way to that, those of you that come into us from a science background or other backgrounds may have dealt with these concepts a great deal more than the average business student, but there is this term that frustrates me a great deal because I'm not smart enough to really get the totality of it, and that's the second law of thermonuclear dynamics, and it's something called entropy. But as we look at it from a system in business, I think the concept that we're going to play with is more something that I would call negative entropy. And now that sounds like it's weird, but I'm going to play that out a little bit in some parts of the evening. So we've got some work on Maslow, maybe a little bit, this concept of general systems theory. Certainly there's the articles. I'm going to do a slightly different twist on the articles tonight, and rather than me throwing out my personal little quirky thoughts on that first, we're going to change the order of that. We'll be doing some interactive stuff with all three groups. I want y'all to come back at all of us with some of your own thoughts about what I would call connections and disconnections in those articles that you read, and then we'll try to tie those into, again, the rambling insanity of the evening. Another piece that I will share with us is an article that may seem to be quite old when I give you the source of it, 1993. And it's like, wow, why are you going back 17 years? But the man that wrote it, I think he's probably still living. I met him, heard him, had him speak over at my previous school. I thought he was quite the visionary in terms of what he was telling business faculty and business people, mostly in the Northwest because he was professor at University of Washington. But he wrote an article called The Management of Crises and Tribulations. And I'm going to share with you some of his thoughts about why he wrote it and where he's going with that. What we should avoid, what we might move to. And when you look at that and think about some of the criticisms, as it were, of industry today and the movement of society in an organizational sense, where those organizations are, once again, not necessarily or particularly defined by being private, public, big or little, but all systems in general, it sounds like the stuff that he told us 17 years ago is happening today. You know, we look at these organizations and see what are the crises that we're facing and what could we or should we do about those. And so I'll share with you a little bit of his work. Then what's the other thing? Then I have some notes on, and if you looked at the title of the evening, the social issues and gender issues, I'll take us into that a little bit, not too much. But with regard to the social issues, I will try to share with us, at least from a couple of points of view, variations on that theme. One is some more precise looks at the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. How many of you, I'm going to just look for a quick show of hands. When I say Sarbanes-Oxley, does that ring a note of recognition with anybody? I see lots of hands up, so that's good. And I actually, boy, this is really bad. I don't have a citation for this. But just notes on Sarbanes-Oxley, but I'll share with you some comments on that. And then what else? the issue of sustainability. You know, what is that or isn't that? One of the books that I've started reading is actually written by an educator for educators for administrative folks in education out of Canada. And it's called Sustainability and Leadership. But if you sort of don't really get into what he's trying to tell school teachers and school administrators and read the portions of what he talks about sustainability, and that I don't have it with me tonight, but if you want that, I can source that for you later on. I'm going to share with you what he says are 8 parts of a definition of sustainability. And I think that that's something that we can all play with. It's out there on the edges. It's sort of a buzzword. I don't know particularly what it is or it isn't. I'll give you an example of the frustration and the sort of the different looks at that a variety of people have. There's a number of people on this campus that are involved in that issue. I talked about that already. But last week I had a conversation with an individual about a course that I'm going to start teaching in the winter, a new one that I'm going to try to put together on sustainable leadership, whatever that may mean, right? So in putting together the list of readings for that and definitions as we go through that, I've been trying to give that syllabus to a few faculty and say, can you give me some feedback and what do you think? And one of them said, well, do you mean the leadership of sustainability? And I said, well, no, that would be something, you're going to have to define sustainability and say, then I'm going to go find a leader that's going to move what you're calling sustainability. And we hadn't even figured that out yet. Is that going to be the geography classes or the water classes? Or we have a faculty in our department that's really, really into wind energy. And that's sort of the frame of reference where he stops his definitions of sustainability. And then I talked to another faculty member on sustainability, and she said, well, maybe that's a larger social issue, and it has to do with moral compasses and the value of the greater good. And I said, okay, that's fine. Now we got all kinds of different things going on this issue of sustainability or sustainable leadership or something called social responsibility. And do we have to play there or not? Which y'all have already been engaged in this conversation, some of you online, and so we hope that we're going to just ratchet that up a notch. So, in general, some comments about the articles. We'll go over those. I want to do a little bit of wrap-up maybe on the transcendence or mutual stuff, which does move into the questionable movement of society and organizations from singular decision processes to collective decision processes, which for those of you that have heard my ranting before know that that's a constant. And if you look at nearly any operational system that's got people in it, their effectiveness is usually a struggle with how good they are at moving up and down that continuum. And so we need to kind of play with that. So that's kind of where we're headed. 1, 2, now I've got about 3 different sets of notes. Has anybody seen the, and I asked you about this already, has anybody seen the movie Class Action? Have I asked you about it or you've seen it? Right, okay, well I will, I'm going to mention Jan Slickman, the real John Travolta, tonight, and we're going to talk not a lot about that, but I have some notes from when I heard him speak, and we're going to talk about what he says in terms of societal response, what happened to him, and then if I use the company name Interface, has anybody ever heard of this company? Yes? No? If I talk about carpet squares as opposed to carpet for a whole room, does that, this company called Interface sells carpet squares, and they are so good that once they're laid down, you don't know whether it's a carpet square and seamed every 4 feet or if it's been laid across an entire floor. And that's a pretty interesting, high-quality product. And so I'm going to talk about that company in relationship to General Mills and Beatrice Foods that Schlickman had a great deal of trouble with in terms of their impact of what they do, you know, on society at large, and whether or not we need to worry with that at all. Anyway, we started that conversation a bit last week. So that's kind of where we're headed in general. I'm going to start the evening out with some, I don't have these in digital form, but if you want them, I could certainly put them in digital form. It wouldn't take me a great deal of time to do that. But just, I'm going to run through just a bunch of quotes. And some of them are directly related to tonight, and some of them are more in regard to the leadership stuff that we'll do in a couple of weeks, but and concepts of change and stuff like that. Unknown and without proclamation, the future will be here. Okay? We don't have much choice about that. It's going to happen. So I guess the choice is how we respond to and deal with that. Study the opposites, which is really hard for linear thinkers who have their way of looking at the world and say, here's the answers. They don't want to look at anything outside of this particular point of view. But that more and more they tell us that those things are outside of our points of view are the things that are impacting us. Katharine Hepburn said, if you obey all the rules, you're going to miss all the fun. It's like my granddaughter saying, Papa, question authority. It sounds great, but it's also going to get us in a lot of trouble. And I'm not so sure we want to do that, but if we don't do it, I don't know. Meg Wheatley, who is... She's comes from a biology background and others, but she's a great, fairly well-known management consultant. She's got a book that I used a bit of time ago, and I had students had love-hate relationships with it. Some of them loved it and some of them hated it. But the book that I'm talking about is Management and the New Science. And what she's done is attempted to explain to the lay manager quantum mechanics and chaos and complexity theory, which is like, oh, wow, that's too complicated. I don't want to mess with that. But she says this, in organizations, real power and energy is generated through relationships. And it's like, so we want the answers, and we spend a lot of our time and a lot of our classes teaching you the formulas, teaching you even things that are not so formula-driven, but maybe like marketing, price, product, promotion, and placement. And we tend to say, that's the answer. I've got it laid out. It's structural. It's definitive. And I stop there. And then we forget about managing what's going on amongst all those things in those relationships. There is no contest between the company that buys the grudging compliance of its workforce and the company that enjoys the enterprising participation of its employees. Now, that sounds like a kind of an innocuous statement. But I was talking to an individual in another firm someplace else about how they were being treated in a fairly negative way. It wasn't really, you know, I hate you, I'm a really jerk of a boss, but it was like, here's some things that you've got to do, and you didn't do it right this way. And they weren't going to change their behavior at all. But in the conversation, it came up that wouldn't it have been nice if the boss could have just acknowledged the fact that they knew what was going on, and yet in their overall performance, they had done a lot of great things and really kind of ratchet that up in a positive way and say, this is great. I'd like you to do those same things, but wow, keep on going, rather than go fix that. And the energy cycle that you get into in terms of fixing negative things versus being passionate and excited about which direction we're going. Or that let the rabbit run stuff, you know. That's not bad. Where there is no vision, the people will perish. Maybe that's here, maybe that's not. I love this one. It's James McGregor Burns. Those of you that want to study leadership have to go buy this book. It's leadership. It's about that thick. It's a very heavy read, both emotionally and literally. It's a big book. but he's a political science historian, studies, that particular book is a look at the psychological, sociological, and other determinants of leadership. Kennedy, Gandhi, Hitler, those kinds of folks. And he's one of the people whose work on something called transformational leadership, it sticks with me. It may not with you, I don't know. But in our academic world that we play in, there's a couple of authors named Noel and Taichi who have done work on transformational leadership as opposed to something that they call transactional leadership. And it's like, okay, now we're really getting into these academic word games. But Burns, really talks about transforming the energy level of an entire system. And this is what he says. Leadership is a trust which is exercised for the benefit of all. The leader, serving the followers, guided by a vision of the higher purposes of the organization. I don't know what all that means in some ways. It says, I better start listening to you, and I better tap into what we're all about and the impact that we're making on our surrounding world. Now, we can tie that back into some very clear terms that most business folks are getting familiar with, and that's total quality management. Last couple of times together, you were required to read on that, not deeply, but getting into that concept. But I think that much of that work has been cut short by trying to defend singular operational units using some kind of measurements of quality performance, a la Crosby or Deming or somebody else. And they really have failed to recognize that this unit is being impacted by stuff that's coming into it and is impacting others by something that it's putting out, right? And so to think about this concept of total quality management means that we, all of us, collectively and individually, need to reconcile what we're putting out with the impact that it's having around us. Not just the fact that this one operational unit can be defined as good because we've measured its quality against some quantifiable and statistical measurements rather than something that might be a little bit fuzzy, that might be a little deeper. Think about that concept as I tell you the story of Interface and John Anderson, the CEO, and what he did at that company later. Here is a test to find out whether your mission in life on earth is finished. If you're alive, it's not. If you're still here, you still got work to do. So that's one way to figure this out. Now then, I just kind of got to play around with what it is I want to do when I grow up, kind of stuff, But if you're still here, there's still work to do, and there's still work to do in the companies. Now that begs some other issues. Tonight, here's a question that I want you to start thinking about now because depending on your comfort level with the answer to this question, we'll get some conversation. And I'll share with you personally on that, and you may or may not be willing to do that. We're talking about gender issues. I have a question of why is it just gender? Is it something else? Are you pink polka dotted and are you being marginalized as a result of that? So the question is, in your own life, wherever you are coming from, whatever your perceptual field is, have you got experiences where you personally feel like that your efficacy, your ability to be out there and do something impactful has been marginalized? And so if you can think about that question, no matter where you're coming from, gender, race, color, creed, or whatever, you might be able to begin, although some people would tell me, and my wife includes it, she said, Jerry, you're just a man, that's it. You'll never be a woman. You don't understand. Don't even try. And I'm thinking, yeah, but I really got to try, to understand how that, and we've had this conversation online this week. Some of us have been engaged in that, and so think about that. Have you been marginalized? And so what's the impact on that? And can you continue to produce at a high level? And can you share that sort of intensity of production with the entire work group? Because once again, and here's that shift, that fundamental shift that I'm asking a question about. I'm not quite sure it's there, but they're telling us it is. And that's a shift from individual production to collective production, from individual management to collective management. And that seems to be a global kind of a thing. I'm not sure the answer is there yet, but maybe the frustration of getting there is something to explore. John Wayne said, if you can't hack it, pack it. I like that one. And another question somewhere in this raging set of papers out here, in talking about substitutes of leadership, now I know that we're not quite there yet, but that's another couple of weeks. But in this issue of sustainability and social responsibility and gender issues and things that aren't quite right for somebody, you've got a movement in organization that's happening. Some of them are successful, some of them are not. Go back to the systems theory, and at some point where a system will die, where an organization will fail to produce and not be able to compete in the open markets, how does it continue to go? How does it continue to move on? And so if it's the leader that's doing it, or if it's three bosses at the top that are doing it, or did society create an environment around the organization where the organization had to respond to society, and they did it without regard to interventions, or was some compelling competition out there driving the necessity of an organization to respond to that? But no matter what it is, somebody told me that somebody, somewhere, or somebodies, a number of people, have to hold that core. What is that? You know, how do you know what it is you're going to hold on to? Because, for example, once again, our issues of sustainability and sustainable programs here at EOU, my sense is that here we don't have anybody holding that core. We've got so many great people that are looking at this concept in some fairly myopic ways, but we've got this happening here and this happening here, but there doesn't seem to be a collective, either a body of people that have been able to create a critical mass to move us forward, or one person even, if that's what it takes, that is just so insane about it that they're holding this thing for everybody to move on with, right? And so this is a quote from a novel. He comprehended that he would have to go into it rather away from it. The only way to master that was to find the center. Somewhere in the center of the spinning world would be the eye, would be the core of stability. You know, and I know these are esoteric things, but it's like, where do you get that? You know, where does it come from? You know, and I've used this phrase several times in the last 2 or 3 classes. My apologies for those people that are uncomfortable with it. I'm not at this place emotionally and ideologically today, but this is where I grew up, you know, in my upbringing. But if I ask you if you understand what a sense of calling is, you know, some people understand that. And other people don't, because their backgrounds, that's why I think everybody should take a class in comparative religions, you know, because you find a passionate executive and say, what do you do? And they say, well, I make rugs, or I do this. But you find a passionate person that comes from an ideological background, and they'll give you an entirely different reason for their work and where it's coming from, and say, I am guided, you know, I am directed, or I am this, and that sense of I am called to do something. You know, those are the people, more than likely, whether it's coming from that place that they know of, or just that, again, that's why I'm beginning to look at Maslow's work, and he calls this sense of moving beyond one's physical self, transcending. You know, not, oh, you know, God called me, or Jesus said, or Allah said, or Buddha said. You know, it's like, hey, I've got this sense of purpose. I've transcended that, and I have this sense of, hey, it's right for me to engage in it. Those are the people that are going to hold that core. So go find some of them and play with them, you know. That's the kind of thing, that, or become one of them, you know. I don't know. Those are the quotes for today. Comments, questions, observations. Where are you at since last time that we were together? We had some nice conversations going on the net, or some not. I mean, it's good. I like that. You out there? You awake? Did I put you to sleep already? You know? I'm going to stop talking for a minute. You can respond. So I just let the dialogue on the net go, and so that's where we get all our conversation. Maybe. Well, let me ask you what order we might want to do some of this in. I got some comments on Meso. I've got some comments on systems. I have some comments on sustainability and social responsibility that we will play with. I have some comments on the articles, but those are not going to come until after I get your comments, and then Bill Scott's article on crisis and tribulation. So those are the things we got to play with in the next couple 3 hours. My thoughts on the order of the evening were, and I'll throw this at you and see if this works, is that what we might do to start the evening out is that we'll take our Hermiston group, and you guys look over the articles. You can take the Clackamas group. You guys look over the articles. Here in this class, we probably could divide up into 3 groups and look at the articles and not just get into them deeply and dissect them, but and it may well be that not everybody's read every article, but hopefully we'll have enough people in each group that have got to some of the articles. And what I would like to do is bring back some of your comments about key points, whether they were negative or positive. And I'll let you be the ones to determine what we bring back to the body at large. But I would like to have you guys kind of play with those articles for a little bit and come back to the group as a whole. What does that sound like as a way to start the evening? Okay, Hermiston, I'm going to leave the mic on, so any kind of time you want to interact question-wise, feel free. But look at the articles that we were assigned, and the issue would be for your group to think about what you think that are critical things that it's saying, either negatively or positively. Same thing with Clackamas. 1, 2, 3, 5... How about you guys just get into 3 groups? You figure out how you want to do it yourself. I'm not going to count you off. I'm going to 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Then you'd have to all move around. Might be easier for you just to sort of turn around in your chairs and sort of collate into 3 areas. Okay? It's 15 till 7 now. I'm going to sort of reconvene us at about 15 after and see what happens. About a half an hour. One of these days, I'm going to really, really spend some time to get into that entropy one. The negative and the positive. Neg-entropy? I even Googled it tonight and I found, and the Wikipedia does this, and then they get into that. And the minute that you look at most of them, they automatically hit thermonuclear second law and all that. And then you get lost. It's like you just automatically get lost. And it's not that complicated. Well, it is, but...
I can point you to a website for a guy who explains a lot of really advanced physics and stuff, real straightforward.
Cool.
And he's from the South and has a great Southern accent doing it.
Well, that would be helpful because it didn't happen to me until a couple 3 years ago, and I think maybe I owe you this because I never really neg entropy.
Yeah, that's actually a term that they use.
But that's what I talk about, in terms of the systems characteristic that is relevant to a business system staying alive or not. It's not the entropy, although it sort of begs the issue because if the entropy is the real law, it's like, well, if it moves to chaos and disorder before it moves back to order, how come we're talking about this concept of a system that keeps it in balance?
The problem is the second law of thermodynamics only applies to systems in equilibrium. if the
Well, and
sequence,
business systems are never in equilibrium, so,
Precisely.
okay.
yeah, so it's
Yeah, but is that like a closed system then?
There's no such thing.
Well, I think so too, but you said it's in equilibrium, so
It's yeah, a system in equilibrium.
let's then see,
There's-
therein
as-
lies the homeostasis and the tension that's necessary. That's one of this lady that I continue to talk about, Spreitzer, her book on these concepts of empowerment, she actually talks about the tension necessary to keep it alive in the first part of her book.
There's actually quite a bit in more esoteric and interesting bits of physics, because a lot of physicists have gone into economics because the physics of quantum states, what they call non-equilibrium steady-state systems, applies really strongly to economic systems, and there's been a whole bunch of people going there. Also, there's some higher level mathematics because, for example, to get a flow of electric charge, you have to break symmetry in 3 dimensions. The problem is when you break symmetry in 3 dimensions, you get an infinite energy flow, and they have no way with standard physics to explain that.
Now this sounds like science fiction movies now, but
No, it's pure.
have you seen
hard
the
literature
series called
physics.
Fringe?
No, I haven't. I've
You,
been tempted to.
you didn't get off on it. It's kind of fun. And the guy that's the scientist, the criminally insane Harvard guy from back, he's got these great one-liners like, "Well, the drugs just aren't as good anymore." And they're finding all these,
Still on?
huh?
Is your mic still on?
Yeah, it's great. But they got his kid's this 190 degree IQ kid, and it's with the FBI lady. They're doing some really bizarre, but it's fun.
Yeah.
It's just a fun, getting great one-liners though in the show. Well, that's interesting.
I think they have episodes on Hulu. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, did I tell you about? Yeah, me too. Because my wife gets it on Netflix, and when I'm not with her, I get to miss them. You know, I said, no, quit it. Wait till I get home. Did I tell you about the novel that I read that was he was basically a venture fund guy, right? But it's called The Monk and the Riddle, and he tells a story. But he gets into all kinds of reasons why you should invest or give money, one of which is the passion and the ideology. But it's either this book or another one where that thing that you just said that about the economics was a part of that and why the systems were breaking down here.
Yeah. Well, I've been rereading Farrell's book, Babylon's Banksters, which talks about the economic system having been controlled by a secretive group of international bullion brokers clear back to Babylon and earlier, and how they also seem to understand that economic cycles are tied to planetary configuration.
Wow.
And he backs it. And Farrell always cites his research and his sources and stuff. There's a huge amount of data. A man named Dewey in the early part of the 1900s was hired by the government to research cycles in business stuff. Huge amount of data and stuff. Interestingly enough, he discovered them, and he also found out that they matched cycles of planetary configuration.
That's wild.
It's like the RCA study in the 50s with interference with radio signals.
See,
He found again that there were astronomical configurations.
I'll bet the numbers and the data that you're talking about would coincide with the stuff that I'm reading. It's just Tim Haley. That's where, in his work on the flow state,
Okay.
an organizational flow rather than an individual flow, when it breaks over into high performance for the total system, right? How do we get there? And he's talking about that. And then Steve and I, in our, quote, Adam Smith deconstructed, are finding evidence that Adam Smith was talking about this stuff before we get the visible hand. And yet everybody just glommed onto the visible hand and said, that's the answer. Free markets and all that. But these other folks are saying, no, those are going to break down. That's not going to work if left to its own accord. It's going to have this other kind of a thing that's this,
Farrell actually looks at these same kinds of ideas that were promulgated as far back as Egypt and Babylon, the whole idea of money in the economy being based on the surplus in the state warehouses versus letters of credit based on the surpluses, based versus actual bullion versus things that represent actual bullion. That stuff has been going on for 5,000 years.
Okay, here's another one for you that you may have read already, but Steve turned me on to this one also. It's John Kenneth Galbraith.
Oh, yeah,
But a novel that he wrote, The Tenured Professor.
It's interesting because I think people in the know can't really say what they know. Oftentimes they'll put Carl Sagan in contact with ideas that he probably knows stuff about. And
I think
that may have been one of the reasons why he was prematurely dead. Because a lot of people end up, when they start talking about that stuff, suddenly they'll get cancer.
Well, this thing that Galbraith is saying, it's fun. I mean, you would certainly enjoy it from being a university employee, but he goes into this thing of tenure and to do or not to do, and you know, where you are protected, where you're not protected, and the whole thing of, I mean, truly, at the Harvard level, you know, what is academic freedom? But he's got these economic theories, and he's playing them out, right? And he goes into, and that's another place. It's like both that Monk and the Riddle, and John Kenneth Galbraith's book called The Tenured Professor. Yeah, I think it, and so I got it on my Kindle and read it. It's a quick read. Yeah, it's a quick read, but Steve turned me on to it.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, little bits and pieces of interesting stuff come out like that. I just stumbled across an article that was referenced on the disclosure site from a site that specializes in secrecy, and they were talking about the list of patents that are held under government march-in rights for secrecy. There's now like over 5,000 of them, and they no longer publish the criteria under which they decide if it's a national security issue. But on some of the older lists they were able to get, solar cells that had greater than 20% efficiency would be eligible for the military to pull as a secret thing.
You got to watch Fringe.
Yeah.
You got to watch Fringe. Because you know, the FBI is involved and national security is involved, and you know, the patterns, what's going on there. We're searching for all this stuff. And all of a sudden somebody will discover this new thing, and then the one FBI lady will go to the superior and say, hey, you're not cleared for that one, you know. It's like, okay, I got you.
They're trying to use the Freedom of Information Act to get the current list, because apparently they stopped publishing it in 1994. The list that has been published is from
Well, it's like you telling me about Defense Space Mission 33. I still can't find anything on it. You get looped into infinite looping.
Interesting.
Well, it is, because it's like, when I'd met Sonny Carter, he said, you know, it's declassified now. Well, yeah, right. You know, and that was, what, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
Yeah,
no.
a lot of stuff disappears into the National Archives and never to be seen again. Apparently they have a really messed up system of cataloging stuff, and some stuff they just don't catalog.
Yeah.
Kind of like
But,
in Indiana Jones, that big underground thing where they stash everything.
yeah, but that one was kind of curious for me too, because you know what you were telling me, the quote conspiracy implications of the number and how it all just kind of floated off into nothingness. I was like, okay, that's fine, that's interesting. Sometime before the evening, I will need to get you to give me directions on how to get to those links.
Oh, okay.
Because I know that you're doing it, and matter of fact,
Been emailing you the link?
you did once,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
But like I said to the class, my technical illiteracy didn't let me get to it somehow, so I don't know what I did right or wrong. So you can walk me through it, and then that way, I can just tell the class, I can just email them and say, email me, and I'll give you the link.
Yeah.
And that way, I don't have to bug you.
Well, yeah. Or there's a way that you can post it. There's a way that you can post links on Blackboard, which you don't put the actual link. You put an alias to the link, and then they just click on the alias and it goes there. Because the links are like 10 feet long.
Right. So I could put it under course documents, for example, on the Blackboard or someplace.
Yeah, you could.
And I could just say, first class, here's the link. Second class, here's the link.
Yep.
All right.
put the date of the class.
I wonder if that would be the best thing to do, and that way I could just email them and say classes are available under Blackboard, under course documents.
Yep, and I usually have, it takes about 15 to 20 minutes for it to process the video after I end the session. So I normally have it, if not by the time I leave, then at least by tomorrow.
Well, I wonder if tomorrow sometime, could I come over tomorrow and do that rather than kind of bug you?
Oh, it'll only take about 10 minutes. I can dig through and find the
What I'm saying is to come over and just work that out with you instead of hanging on the night for a few minutes.
Yeah, depends.
Or is tomorrow a big day?
I'll look at my schedule and stuff. Tomorrow I've got a bunch of meetings in the afternoon and stuff. I've been invited to join the IT subcommittee for the library design.
Well,
Yeah.
I would say that's an appropriate decision.
Considering it, you know, that David and I are getting a big chuckle because for the last 5 or 6 years we've been telling people, this is the direction technology's going. This is the direction technology's going. And sure enough, that's the direction, you know. So it's kind of like maybe.
And I love the folks like you and the librarians and other folks that are in this stuff. It's like you look at the world in different ways, and it's like the interactions are great. My wife and I were listening to, actually I have a note to tell this story later, either here or some other class, I don't know. But we heard a librarian, you know, at a middle school, and she was talking about the programming that they were doing, and she was just totally excited. And you know, the lady finally said, "Well, what's this time like for you right now?" And she said, "Well, it's the most exciting of times because," and she started listing all this stuff was happening. And just 15 minutes earlier in the show, she had talked about 15 years ago when this was just at the budding, and she said she remembered she had to put the modem in her office, and she had 200 feet of cord stretched from, you know, her office into the library, and the only place that you could get it was Brown University or someplace was giving free internet to libraries. And she took it upon herself to do this for the kids. And then she'd go into the library and said, "Okay, let's see if we can get online." And I was just thinking, I remember these, Telnet and stuff like that.
Yeah, when you were hoping for 28K, not less.
Yeah, and God, no, God, it's insane.
I still have a 1200 baud modem sitting at my home somewhere.
But so I can imagine that if somebody would have asked her 20 years ago what these times were like, she would have said, "These are the good times. These are the best of times. I'm excited about my job."
Yeah.
And it's the librarians and folks like you. But up here, we don't get, that's that quote I made earlier. If you just had a boss that would just let the people go, just let them go.
Well, that's my view of management, is that the role of a manager is to remove the obstacles from their employees' performance, whether it's an individual attitude or training issue with the employee, or whether it's an issue with resources,
Skills, resources, anything.
or, you know, interference from other departments.
Take the blocks out.
Whatever, you know. Yeah, get the roadblocks out of the way so that every individual employee, it's a coaching. You have a coaching.
Well, on the extreme negative part of that, not doing that, are like the Tillman story and the friendly fire and the things that I saw in Vietnam, where people are doing exactly the opposite. Not only am I not getting out of the way, I'm putting something in the way for you to do what you're being required to do, and then making you take the heat for all of it.
And there's a whole lot of people that believe that's the way it's done. You know, the Ebenezer Scrooge philosophy of management.
And I'm getting more and more sort of pushy about saying, no, it's not just simply autocratic versus democratic. We've got to move in that direction.
Well, and like you point out, you know, autocratic is
In
appropriate
times.
in certain things like in a firefight,
Right.
or in a fire department or something like that. But there's a whole lot.
But for this,
Yeah, there's a whole lot of other times where it's just a way not of it. If you want performance, that's fine. I'm still working on my myth of excellence article, and
well, you know that my power model, passion, power, and perseveration, and person, no person, is all predicated on, you know, just unbelievably focused and myopic choices of I'm going to isolate all these. But how rare is that? And for the average person, that sense of mediocrity, if you could accept that, would allow you to move along. But you can't accept it, and so in a negative way, you begin to feel less competent about moving towards excellence and then don't even get anywhere. because you're
Your
driving this.
definition of excellence is so different than the stream that you're in that it's irrelevant.
Yeah, and see, that's
A yogi sitting in a cave in India, his view of excellence is so out of step with Wall Street that, you know.
He started this fall.
We're not saying we're moving forward, or we're moving in the direction of and fairness and cohesiveness of society. That's subjective view, but we're still just the dynamics changed from 20 years ago.
There's some, there was one article where the author was saying for women to get those top executive positions, they have to be, I think he used, he used two classifications for women. It was kind of like they had to take the role of a man of dedicating all their time for what. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah,
It was kind of like.
one or the other, no combination.
Right, so it was kind of like, okay, if they're gonna take all their time and to work, it's kind of like, you know, I think they make a point where it's unfeminine. And, you know, that was different. And then if the man were to take maternity leave, they can, you know, it's not masculine, and it looks like it's not committed.
And that's why I say today, at least, my daughter was, they provided a book, and this is how it is. This is,
it's hard to look in the near future when, there's a lot of pressure for corporations to make money,
If that's the goal, regulation. Well, right.
most of the level.
Yeah,
Well, we're gonna.
they keep, but they try to do that by keeping everybody on. I think that's what it is.
Then there's loopholes to something like that. A lot of those government officials are people who used to work, in oil companies, so a lot of the lobbyists are, are able to have an advantage to where some of those restrictions don't apply to them, the bigger corporations, and then you got the smaller companies that are kind of like in the back end, and that's where politics kind of plays in that role too.
I love the fact that you mentioned Goldman Sachs. To me, that was, I call it the before the crash. So the article, I had to look at the date of the article on this one too, just to make sure it was before the crash. They talked about Goldman Sachs and rating companies and stuff like that. Very suggestive. It doesn't. Social benefit. Oh, yeah. To society, something. Donating to some mental cause, helping your employee take care of their children, next generation.
The question is, who's benefiting? Is the company benefiting or society benefiting? The higher you get to the top of those corporations, you're seeing so many executives get cut off or being replaced because, stock shares is not high enough. And it's kind of like, well, I want to be equal to them, but at the same time, my job's on the line, so I got to make that dollar now. And it's kind of like, you forget it, again, like I was saying, you forget about the foresight, and it's, where it doesn't run the company. We talk about corporate social responsibility, and it's kind of like a self-regulation.
Abstract. It's like the newspaper industry, the newspaper in this town, the company, go to small newspapers, they give out awards every year to each other, slapping each other on the back, and there's no independence.
Hey. I'm okay. I'm in class, but I've got them in a group project. I got a minute. What's up? It's like, whoa, this is real interesting.
That sounded really good.
Yeah, so we're going to make another batch.
Awesome.
I'll get you.
starting from scratch when you don't need to, because, it was in an article, usually the manager's going to overlook what the previous system was, want to start from scratch, and then eventually it's kind of like, you bring in your ideas may not work for that certain situation. And it was interesting because it was saying a lot of best practices kind of formulate from the culture of the job.
I should have brought my Tibetan chime with me to go ding. How we doing? We ready to come back to the group here? I've heard bits and pieces of scattering conversations that tend to be either in or out of what the assignment was, so maybe we're ready to come back. How we doing?
Good, interesting readings.
Well, that's a general comment.
Zero question.
Yeah, well, okay. I'm sorry. The thing about teacher response to students is like we want everybody to talk, right, all the time. And so sometimes you'll have 3 or 4 people or 1 or 2 people that will talk, and you watch students and they'll go roll their eyeballs and, say, oh, no, they're talking again or they're not talking again. And you want the other people to talk. And so you're trying to figure out how to respond to everybody and do it in such a way that you're allowing an open exchange and response and a healthy treatment of, rather than, well, that's a stupid thing to say, because the minute that you shut down any conversation, the 4 people that are over there that you're waiting to talk say, you see what he did to her? I'm not talking, forget it. No contribution from me. He treats people bad. So that's one of the reasons I tend to try not to say too much, but it's almost like I go too far the other way, of not making any comments. It's a, boy, what do you do? How about let's just go at this article by article, and I'll throw the article out. We'll get response from you. Then I'll tell you what were my raging and flaming comments. And I was once told by one of my colleagues to never share anything that I wrote after midnight because it was always just really, really out there on the edges. Wait till I get somebody else to read it first. So that's why I wanted to get your input first. So the first one that we'll talk about is 3B12, which was one called The Dark Side of Change or something like that. So I'm just going to go out here. We're going to start at Hermiston. And so folks on that article, what are some of your comments? Critical thinking, as it were, on the dark side.
I guess we kind of talked about the fact that it was kind of interesting to see that maybe when a new manager comes in, that dramatic change is not that much of a good thing, and that we kind of discussed that we maybe need to take a step back and overlook situations when coming into a new position that would let us make better decisions if we step back a little bit and analyze the situation before we made certain changes. And it's okay at times to say that there might not be much wrong when you come into a new job. And I guess that's kind of what some of the feedback we had here.
Okay. I got making notes to myself for my editorializing here. Let's come back to a group. I'm going to go to the far back here in LeGrand. And what was our far back group? What did y'all come up with? However you defined yourselves. I didn't know the demographics of your group membership. Anybody? They got to select a spokesperson first. Yeah. It's a leadership thing, Right here.
We talked a lot about getting to know the importance of getting to know an organization before trying to implement change. What worked at one place or what worked theoretically in your mind may not work in an organization that you're not familiar with. So taking the time to learn the ins and the outs and the processes that exist before suggesting or implementing changes.
Okay, good. I'm going to come up into the middle of LeGrand and your comments on the article.
Us here?
Well, there are 2 groups or 3 groups?
3 groups.
3?
There was kind of that group, this group.
Okay, that group. We're going far back side.
Okay. Well, one thing added to that is you need to know why you were hired. If you were hired to change.
Oh, yeah. Were you hired to be the change agent? Okay. Okay, I'm going back to Clackamas. Other place. Is that Clackamas?
Hi. Yeah, can you hear us okay?
I can.
Good.
Everybody else?
So the one thing that we really talked about is the quote from the article that said, "If it ain't broke, break it," and how that rings so true with many organizations, and they're always looking to change and evolve and make things better. But sometimes it's unnecessary.
Right. Brown. Okay, I'm writing down notes for editorializing and some thoughts on where other people have similar comments. And this is where, whether you use my phrasing and my authors or not, but I encourage you to always first check your own heart when you evaluate the rightness or wrongness of what you're reading, and that's the first place. But then in our, quote, academic world, and I know that there's this place of high performance where, as Yogi Berra said, you can't think and bat at the same time. So we got to quit thinking. But for the time being, we're in a thinking environment, right? So we're playing word games, and we're looking for either support or rejection of the ideas that we're going to put in place. So I'll give you some focus on that. So I'm going to come back up to LeGrand. We're going to get this front group now.
We talked about the questions that management should ask the person that's coming in to basically explain why they want to change them. And really those are, I thought they were good questions that maybe you should ask yourself before you implement a change.
There's always a cost to a change, no matter what. And if you're not making good investment in an individual, the leader, making changes, a year from now you don't like him, he's out of there, and you have to clean up his mess. There's a cost there too.
Right.
So.
It's always good to measure, cost and benefit analysis. I mean, if the cost is outweighing the benefit, then obviously, that's not going to be good for the long run if you're trying to make that dramatic change. And also, it's always good to plan out, what if if you set a goal for that certain change, what happens if you don't get the whole goal, if you get 60% of the goal? Is that still going to be conducive to what you're trying to do as far as goal-wise, maybe profit-wise, if you're trying to make that change? So basically, those 7 questions is always good to evaluate, certain decisions, certain best practices you may use from your, previous situation to your current one, to see if they're going to work or not. So it's always good to go through all the scenarios.
And they mentioned that vine down in the southern states. Are you familiar with the KUDZU? I don't know.
Kudza?
Oh my goodness. That's amazing. That is a very prolific vine. I like the comparison.
How do we get rid of it?
How do we get rid of that?
Good. Let me editorialize a little bit from what you said. I have some names to either support or reject some of where you're at, or say, yeah, it is like, oh, yeah, I got it. And going from bottom up, one was this cost-benefit thing. No, it wasn't my first graduate school hours. I have some graduate hours in a public administration program at University of Idaho, and one of the classes was from a lady who was really she had us all doing impact studies of social programming. We're going to change the way that the police force impacts. We need to do food stamps, or we need a swimming pool. And she was saying, well, that's a social issue, but you still need to do cost-benefit analysis of it. And it was not just monetary. She said, what's it going to cost you? What is the benefit? Oh, well, is that a quantitative benefit? X number of people go to the swimming pool, or we prevented X citizens from going to jail, but wait a minute, how did you do that? Well, we gave X number of tickets. So is a quota system and the cost and the benefit of that a positive benefit or a negative benefit? What does it cost monetarily? How many people? And it was like, it's kind of along the orders, but she kind of ratcheted up a notch in terms of saying you need to measure the social cost and the social benefit, which is where some of this stuff on sustainable leadership is going. Because if I am thinking about high performance leadership for the individual gain or the profit and loss of one operational unit as opposed to a total system, I've lost some of that. So always, always, always digging deeper, digging farther. You know, where does it come from? Where does it go to? How many people are being impacted by that? So yes, change means that we're always sort of monitoring that. What questions of management do we ask either from the hiree or persons hiring or persons being hired? What hit me, and I don't know why this is, but 2 or 3 years ago, there was actually a time when EOU had designated that they were going to hire a separate dean for the College of Business. Now, I don't know if you know about our organizational structure here, but we've gone from having chair people, which are, and if you can, let me just graphically say, chair people or chairpersons are here, deans are here. Now, there's all kinds of ways to talk about differentiated performance, whether deans are folks that are working out in the community to go generate income and serve what the institution does to meet the needs of the community as opposed to the students, and chair peoples do detailed work like coordinate schedules, and those are maybe differentiated functions. And in a large organization, you're going to have people that are categorized and fit into those positions. Well, we don't have that, okay? We've always had variations on combinations of people that do multiple functions. And most of the time, we've had one dean that has been managing, leading, directing any variations on that theme that you have of the School of Business or the College of Business and the College of Education. Well, you may or may not know this, and if I say the word cash cow, does that, I mean, do you understand that term either in an organizational sense as an operational productive center, production center, or center of profit in an organization? That's a cash cow. You never kill your cash cows. Whatever it is, whatever unit produces more income, you want to let those people play, you know. And in most colleges and universities, business schools tend to be cash cows. We generate tons of income streams for the school. Consequently, you know, our thoughts are that, well, if that's the case, if we're generating that kind of flow, then we would like an organizational structure and an allocation of some of the income to give us back some of what we've created so that we can keep doing more of it. And a couple of 3 years ago, we actually had a man that had been brought to campus and made it through all the interviews and had convinced them that they could pay him just a little bit more than what the averages were in other places. And he was the one, not us, that asked those questions that I can't do this for you guys because it's so odd, and you know where we're at in terms of role and mission and what I can offer and what you think that you want out of me. He kept on asking those questions and saying, you know, we're in a different place. And you got to admire that man for saying it. And I wish that he wouldn't have done that, because this school was at a place to where they would have hired this man, but he backed out of it. And then the next thing you know, it's like, okay, whew, thank goodness we don't have to spend that money for that one, you know. And we still have one person running 2 huge pieces of our organization. And the School of Business or the College of Business has a bigger number of students. Now, that doesn't mean that we're better than anybody else, because we're a liberal arts university, and the number of students that have all those other majors are part of what makes the beauty of a liberal arts school. And we all play together, and it makes everybody's education better. But we generate more students than anybody else, so, you know, shouldn't we have a little bit more of the pie to keep on doing more of that? But it's interesting. So that question just made me think about that. If it ain't broke, break it. There is a man who has written a book called Conflict at Organizational Interfaces. It's a kind of funky title, but basically that's what he says. He says it's the responsibility of management to keep breaking things in such a way that you create enough tension that an organization will continue to reinvent itself. Now, if you believe what I'm going to say the quote, and those of you that have heard me say it can tell me who said it. Jack Welch, thank you very much. If the rate of change outside of the organization is faster than the rate of change inside the organization, the end is in sight. So now Jack Welch is of GE fame, and he's got some stuff that he did right. People loved him, and then there was a certain group of people that said, nah, he just messed things up. But he was a visionary with regard to the fact that he needed to know that the system was looking out there enough to see what's happening outside of the organization and seeing the change rates, and then orchestrating the events inside the system, however you do it, to be responsive to that external change. But this is going a little bit beyond that. It's saying, no, 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 it's not just a matter of looking at the potential change out there. And the people that study creativity and innovation know that when you've reached a certain level of knowledge, that things stop. They just stop. And in the work that I've done with organizational assessment research, there is that pattern of workflow. Production is increased in the middle of no tension and too much tension. Zero tension, you've got apathy, you've got no care, either or no knowledge, or the system is just dead already, right? Or you put a cast on it and it's all atrophying. It's not going anywhere, right? On the other end of that is so much controversy and chaos and dysfunctional conflict that it's like out here, and we're not getting anything done there either. So we have to make this struggle between how far you go with breaking it, right? You break it too much, and people can't put it back together. Or if you don't break it at all, we're not going to do anything anyway. So where do you go with that? Another advocate of that, and I think a more responsible way, is you've heard me talk about the lady named Gretchen Spreitzer. I can't remember the full name of the book. I can find it if you want it. Email me. But it's her book on companies and how to lead inside of companies. This concept that I talked about, the empowerment, the competence and meaning, skill fit, value fit. In her book, she actually talks about the necessary tension that keeps that company here. With no tension at all, we've got no movement. So I don't know. We're out to lunch on that one. But I think that it's a really dicey line on terms of whether or not it's your responsibility to keep jerking people's chains just to make them move. It gets kind of irritating when I feel like I'm being moved that way. You know, is that what it takes? I don't know about that. I don't know if somebody mentioned the word benchmarking, but I think that, was that mentioned in one of your comments? I wrote it down, but it's getting to know the organization's capacities, what you can do that maybe somebody else can't do. If I use the word benchmark, do you understand that, or at least have heard it? Benchmarking is best practices, and at the extremes of this concept called benchmarking, right, you change your organization to mimic completely a best practice that you've seen someplace else. And that's not what I heard whoever was talking about saying that. And I'll give you an example of how that was intended at one organization and never happened. And that was, it's one of my constant stories, so I may have even already told it in here, but it's about the Bullet Company in Lewiston. And one of our students that was a production manager, he was given the job to go to one of their franchise or one of their merged plants. I don't know who it was, ATK or Sperry or somebody like that, but it was a plant down south, right? Because they were producing more bullets per employee than the plant in Lewiston. And they said, well, if we can do what they do, we're going to increase our profit margins and yada, yada, yada. So they sent this guy down to this plant in the south to benchmark them, to best practice, and to come back to Lewiston and change them overnight. And that was the intent. And he almost got fired over his refusal to implement the plan. You know, and it took him quite some time and quite some convincing to say, we could benchmark and we could do this, but it would mean this kind of physical change in the plant. It would mean this kind of structural change in the organizational structure. It would then mean this kind of employee change in the number of and the distribution of, and I'm not so sure that Lewiston can handle that. You know, and he was talking about the culture and the values of the people. That quote earlier where it said that it's about managing relationships. And he was trying to say, no, you're telling me it's all about the structure and the numbers and the physicality of their profit margins, and we're going to replicate, period, you know, A to Z, everything that they do. And he said, we can't do it. It's not going to work here. And he finally convinced them that and Lewiston was actually targeted to be shut down, you know, at some point, and they're still one of the major producers, you know. So it seems like he was somewhat successful in saying, we can do good things, we can take some of what they do, but we can't just lockstep change overnight to look like somebody else. So we have to be careful about that. I wrote down the name Owen with a couple of different groups with regarding to getting to know people. And the story that I tell about him, well, I won't even tell the story, I'll just tell you his concept of management consulting, this guy named Harrison Owen. He doesn't use numbers, which is really unusual for an organizational consultant that does major corporation consulting and evaluation. They usually got a fairly sophisticated database. They can quote numbers. How many of you watched the movie The Office and saw the, you know, they get the numbers and they said, oh, well, you got 3 of those and 6 of those, and you fire those 2 people, and then they start having interviews with all of the people and start laying them off based on the statistical analysis of the assessment. Managers want that. They want serious black and white accountability for the numbers that you show them. And Harrison said, I'm just simply not going to do it. And so he went around asking people to tell them stories. Tell me good stories, tell me bad stories. And then what he did was he put the bad stories in his back pocket. I mean, not literally, but he refused to retell them, which is not quite what you see out there in the management consulting world, right? You see the people retelling the mistake stories and retelling the incompetencies and trying to fix the wrong things. And Harrison said, no, it's not going to work that way for me. What I want to know is what they're doing good. Tell me the stories of your heroes. And he started repeating the legends that were being told anywhere from 5 to 10 years ago of who did what when, of these heroic figures in the organization. And people started trying to repeat the stories of the heroes in their lives. And so the changes that were happening, excuse me, were positive, but based on what he was finding out inside the organization. Last comment on this article, and that is, I wrote down the phrase, dramatic is bad. And I don't know which group was saying this. And so as we read this article, you do get the impression that the dark side of change agents is that we immediately go in and impose these radical changes in an organization. And we think that's, isn't there a more humane, nicer way to do that? And I tell 2 stories there. One is that before I did some of my own organizational assessment work with Blue Cross Blue Shield Regent, I had been involved in sort of a, just more of a relationship. I wasn't a consultant, I wasn't hired, I was just a faculty in a local school of business, and I knew some of the executives, and some of the students that we had were actually mid-career executives. And so we had this exchange going on about their growth and their product and services and what they were delivering. And we knew that they were undergoing some changes, one of which was this movement from centralized decision to participative management and open teams and no bosses and stuff like that, and structural changes inside the system. And there were some people that were fairly disgruntled about that. And who do you might think it have been? The people that were getting laid off, you know, and the middle managers who used to be in control of a unit and being given rewards and profit margins and percentage bonuses based on delivery of services and goods in operational units, and they were being cut out. They were not happy about that, right? So you had maybe destructive conflict in the system. And so there was a lot of bubbling up. Now then, in this same set of informal sort of storytelling and listening to what's going on, the pulse of the company 6 months after that was entirely different. Because who was left were all the people that made it through the cuts, right? And their reward was to keep their job, and some of them who used to have reward systems down here in that collective distribution of rewards were now a little bit higher than they used to be, but the ones who were targeted for layoffs were still at least there. So who was left was more content and satisfied than who was being asked about radical change. And so if you ask that organization about radical change, they'd say, forget it, it doesn't work. But 6 months later, everybody's content. Now then, one last comment on that, and then we'll shift articles, and that is, I would offer to you folks to explore that would defend either way, right? And one of those is certainly Tom Peters' work in what he did, his first book, In Search of Excellence. But then you've got the Japanese phenomena coming on called Continuous Quality Improvement, that CQI. And it's a gradual, incremental approach to improvement. You're always making the next best sigma 6, how many defects per 1,000, you know, kind of thing. And it's very, very gradual, right? As opposed to the work of a man named Champy, C-H-M-P-Y. And he has written stuff on what he calls radical reengineering. And he says, if you look at change, and if you look at successful change in turbulent environments, it happens radically. It's not overnight. It's not gradual. It's not incremental. And as humane as incremental may seem to all of us on the throes of being changed, you know, if you look 6 months, 9 months, 10 months, 12 months down at what happened during the event itself, you're going to see radical movement. I'm not sure that that's right or wrong, but those are two opposing views, and you can defend your point of view with either one of them. Champy talks about radical reengineering, and Peters will talk about, as do the Japanese theorists, talk about continuous quality improvement. Okay, 6824. We're going to go another way around. First group up here in LeGrand. Comments on your Women in Management article. We're talking about this first group up here.
I thought it was outdated.
Outdated.
A little bit.
Okay.
I mean, there were some very specific things that made me look up the date of the article and a little bit about the author of the article, where it was written, or who it was written for. I like the article in a general sense. I think that it just points to a problem in management and business and in general in our culture. Women have always been always put down and always held back, and I think the statistics and the numbers still support that, absolutely.
I thought it was interesting. We talked about it a little bit in our group that the article is dated a bit, but some of the things that are said, I mean, I still think stand true. Like, it says how if a woman were to continue with her career after she had a child right away, then she would look unfeminine, or, you know, it's not motherly of her.
They lose no matter what.
Exactly, but if she stays home, then it's like, oh, of course she's going to do that. We got to find, and that's the reason why companies don't hire him. But if a man were to take maternity leave, then he's not masculine. He's not goal-oriented. He's not driven. He's not motivated. We just thought about how it's interesting, you know, it's almost like there's nothing to be said about being a good parent.
Right.
And, you know, preparing your child for life and for the next generation. And
right.
So.
It's interesting, my son, for the last 6 months, was the policy analyst coordinator for the retirement program for the state of Oregon. And when he was in that job for these 6 months, part of the conversation in our family was, is Bill going to take paternity leave, you know, where they have their child? And he got recruited by a non-federal state entity by a private company, you know, and that conversation is not on the table now. It's really interesting to see his shift in whether or not he will take a 2-month paternity leave when they have their kid, you know, or kids, whatever they do. So, all right, we're going to move one more back to LeGrand, and then we'll shift. Okay, we're moving back one group. Okay, women in management.
Well, we also kind of talked about, I guess, what Razor said about the men taking paternity leave and how they're going to look unmasculine when doing it. But also, a female who chooses her career over a family is looking masculine and not feminine, in the sense that she's wanting to outcompete other people and not start her own family.
It's that time where you lose no matter what. If you act like a woman, then, well, you're not being a good manager. And if you act like the man, well, you're not being a feminine woman. So it's like, you know, what do they do? It's like you can't win in that, you know. So, yeah. I'm coming to Clackamas, or we're virtually there. So
Okay,
what do you say?
we're on. We just find it a demotivating article. I mean, the concept that it costs more to employ a woman than a man in management is not only jarring, but it really is outdated. And Felice puts forth a 2-track proposal which suggests that downgrading most working mothers to a gentler career path known as a mommy track. And where does that put us women who are trying to establish an MBA? I mean, for us ambitious women, it's merely just instills this fear that having children will cost us a chance at top jobs.
Right.
It's horrifying. It really is.
It is demoralizing, you know, and it, even though as my, I don't mean to be denigrating with this term, but as my feminist friends, including my daughter and my wife, talk to me about this, they say that the very language that we're using to rationalize and explain this is continuing to demoralize and marginalize the women. So it's like, you know, we're not getting it right yet. Something about the way that we're doing this, you know. So, yeah, it is demoralizing. Yes, sir?
I have a question. Is the first sentence accepted as truth?
I don't have my book with me. Somebody read it to me.
The cost of employing women in management is greater than the cost of employing men.
See, and I'm not sure that that's right either. My editorial comments that I wrote down was about that and saying, well, is that accurate? And if it is accurate, what is the profit margin? What is the cost? And it's like, if that's true, why are they paying them less if it costs them less? Or why aren't they paying them more if it costs them more? You know, I don't get the relationship.
Yeah, well, she says later that, okay, they're worth it. If you do the cost-benefit analysis, they're worth it. But
that's a qualitative societal judgment. And now we're going back and forth between quantitative and qualitative analysis. But I don't know if it's a right answer.
I mean,
be interesting to somebody to do some
that's the question.
Figures out there.
If it is right, and corporations are driven by profits and beholden to their shareholders, then are they doing anything wrong? But if it is not right,
or where does the answer to what is right and wrong come from? If it's like you say, a shareholder and a legal technicality, you know, then they're not doing anything right. But if they have an impact on society and the greater society is starting to be impacted by that decision and say, no, we've got a judgment call. And I would throw out to you the blacks and the women earlier, and again, the one that I used down in South America, the Sandinistas. Prior to the time of change, the accepted both corporate and monetary entity and the social framework accepted that way of living. And then at some point, society at large said, no, we don't want that. So they began to encroach upon whether or not this was a correct value or not. And so are we at that place now with, quote, women in management? I don't know. This sort of drives some of my earlier question also, and that is, why is it just women? I mean, this article is about women in management, but are there other marginalized groups that are experiencing some of these same things? Did we cut you off at Clackamas? Do you need to say more, or are we going to move? Okay, I'm going back to LeGrand. Go. Yes? No? Comment? All the above? Ditto? Coming back up the front, there's a question or a comment up at the front. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, it was somewhere in the article where it was saying that most top executives are at the age of 55, or at least when this article was dated, which kind of, I guess, with the argument of the author, kind of cuts out the women who are trying to progress to be top executives. So on average, for the article,
right,
with those women who have children at the age of around, 38 to 40, kind of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but it kind of eliminates them out of the running for top executives. So I was thinking, this is 21 years ago. Now you're getting more CEOs, men or women, who are younger, who are kind of at that age of, early 40s now. So,
and not many families are having kids at 40.
Right. So
at
now,
35 maybe, but not many at 40.
Right. So I mean, I thought it was kind of
interesting.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah. The other thing hits me there too is like thinking about the executives today that are 50 to 60, my generation of folks, and there's not very many women out there. And is that a part of the issue too? And the women that are out there are 35 to 40. And so are they being marginalized because we're still the good old boy network? There's some interesting observations there. Now then, back group.
We talked about, I think we kind of took it a different direction and talked about a little bit how the shift, the younger generation is culturally shifting to be more accepting of women in management in general. But the other thing is that the advancement in technology is making it far easier for women to go take maternity leave and still be part-time if they want to stay engaged in the company.
Virtual managers.
We have a gal in our office who just had her second child, and she's gone back to be commander-in-chief of the family, but we couldn't afford to lose that institutional knowledge because she's been with the office for the last 8 years. So instead of lose her entirely, she's working from home. She's virtual. She never comes in anymore. But she's still on her BlackBerry, and she's still, we can get her, at a moment's
she
notice.
can do this texting stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. And she's got a work laptop at home and all of that, just because we need the institutional knowledge. So we really didn't lose her. She's definitely taken a big step back, and she's not managing the day-to-day stuff, but she's definitely engaged on the higher level issues. So I think that's really enabled a shift to keep women involved, or keep, anybody involved who can't go to work from 9 to 5 or whatever the hours are. There's something else. Yeah.
Hermiston.
Well, I think that we went along that same route, talking about the generational differences. Some people who are maybe in their 40s or 50s, work day is 8 to 5. It's black and white. And younger generations maybe are utilizing the technology more. The technology actually was new. I don't think we talked as much about technology, but I actually commented on the fact that the flexibility, sometimes in my job that I have, they say, okay, get us 40 hours, finish your tasks, and that's what we expect. And so I have kids in school. If I work a 12-hour day one day, and then I get to maybe come in a little late the next morning so that I can go to one of my kids' classrooms, that makes me a happier employee. And these guys pointed out sometimes too, it makes that employee even more productive because of their happiness with their job, and they're able to balance their lives and feel a little bit more appreciated, I guess.
More humanistic.
Is that
kind of a thing? Just a couple, 3 comments. Once again, and again, please, I'm not trying to denigrate the importance of our inability as a society to deal with this as a woman's issue. But I think it's a lot more complicated than that. And to me, I want to ask the question, why just women only? You know, we dealt with this at my previous school in the faculty's attempt to set what we thought was an appropriate policy of dealing with this that would be enforceable at an institutional level. And so in our statements of protected categories of folks, right, and there is legal language around that at the federal and state level. Now, I will not discriminate against race, creed, religion, yada, yada, yada. And I don't know exactly what the terminology is. But we had made a statement as a group of people in an organization that said, you know what, that doesn't play with us. We would like to take a higher, quote, moral ground, and then we would like to tolerate and accept and respect everyone. And so we want to change the words. And we want to say, Lewis Lake State College does not discriminate, period. End of story. You would not believe the backlash that we got from every lawyer that represented us, all the way from the state to our individual lawyer to human resource lawyers that said, you can't do that. Because if you change the words of this protected category clause to do that, we're not going to give you federal financial funding. We're not going to do that. You're going to lose, you know, your relationship at the federal and the state level monetarily. And so we were forced in a legal sense to go back to those words that you will not discriminate against race, religion. And so what you've just done legally is that you've discriminated against every category that you didn't include in the laundry list. Because they're not in the laundry list, so therefore they're not protected. And we were trying to get away from that. So it's a hard, you know, ground legally to get our legal system and our federal and state system to acknowledge that some people would like to say, we don't discriminate against anybody. And therein lies my second question is, you know, at that point, or the first question is that, you know, if we can somehow come to grips with lots of people in lots of walks of life have been marginalized in a variety of ways, maybe it increases our awareness. Doesn't solve the problem, but if more and more people become aware that there have been damage to particular groups of folks, maybe we'll be more empathetic in resolving those issues in that. A couple of more comments that are probably more mundane and less sort of lofty. You mentioned the institutional knowledge. It brought to my mind the president of the university that I taught at in Romania. He now is a member of parliament and a representative to the European Union for the northeastern parts of Romania. So obviously, however this man lives his life, he's respected in a larger category than being just a university president. But he had conversations with me about one of his dreams, which was to protect institutional knowledge. Because when these categories of people, be it whether it's women or older people, which was his little his little pet peeve, I guess, was that once they are retired out or leave the system, you don't have access to their incredible knowledge base, institutional memory. And he was trying to find out ways to either give them a little bit of money beyond their retirement check or an extra job or something and work it within the framework of a fairly archaic, legal, and unbelievably structured and rigid system of rewards and money to say, yeah, you're retired, but we're not going to cut you out here. I want to bring you back, teach an extra class, do something, or pay you as a consultant, or somehow give them a reward to acknowledge their contribution for many years and bring their institutional memory back into the younger generation of that institution, assuming that the institution is going to sustain itself into the future. Another one, and this is I don't know why I wrote this one down, but it was because of the virtual organization and whether or not that's a real thing or not. You know, we have these organizations that are moving to these other ways of behaving. Now, and in several colleges and universities that are coming from traditional backgrounds and organizations that are coming from standardized traditional modes of operation, top down, you know, 9 to 5, 8 to 5 production environments. And now we're moving, because of societal changes, to these virtual things. In our world, it would be called multimodality teaching. We teach this way, we teach online, we teach in correspondence, we teach on the phone, we teach any way we can. We teach at nights, we teach on weekends, and we say to the world, we're a virtual organization that provides goods and services in this virtual world. And on the other hand, in our measurements of performance, if I don't see you there physically 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, then guess what? You're not going to get rewarded. So it's like, no, wait a minute. You just said this, but you're holding somebody accountable in a different way of behaving. And at the school that I taught at before, we often laughed that if a faculty member was caught mowing their yard at Wednesday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they were in trouble. And for goodness sakes, if they were not at a committee meeting on Friday at 3 o'clock, they were really in trouble because the president was walking around doing merit check on Friday afternoon. But it didn't account for the fact that those very people who were not there at 3 o'clock on Wednesday or 3 o'clock on Friday had been up at 3 o'clock in the morning 4 nights that week meeting the needs of students that were out there in virtual student land. You know, so where's the integrity in the organizational product and services shift and how we are holding accountable people accountable for that? So we've got a funky thing going on here too.
I think one of the challenges, and the technology is growing faster than the culture can acclimate to it. And one of the challenges is the president or the VP can walk around and see you in the room and check. He can't walk into your bedroom at 3 o'clock in the morning and see you online and go check.
But he can see the visibility of me there, right?
Yeah, and so the systems of accountability that will be necessary are not quite in place, or we're not in place.
We need to work on that.
Yeah, like I'm saying.
How do we measure your outcome?
Yeah.
How do we hold you accountable? Yeah. I mean, my pet peeve, and those of you who've been in my classes before, it's like whether or not I'm going to be held accountable for making you sit here for 50 hours or if I'm going to hold you accountable for what you walked away with. Can you use this information in your next class? You know, 4 years from now, is it still with you? You know, or did we measure this outcome against some kind of objective that said these 6 pieces of information are important, and I don't care whether you sat in a chair 50 hours to get it or you got it through some virtual Socratic discussion or not, but did you get it? And can you figure out a way to measure me on whether or not you're walking away with a new set of information rather than this other sort of thing? I got in trouble one time in a school for having classes outside under a tree. It's a great, beautiful day, and the chairperson of the unit came by and said, "Get back in the classroom. You have to teach in the classroom." And I go, whoa, this is really bizarre. You know, students were loving it. We were out there engaged in conversation. But we had to go back and sit in the classroom for a while longer. I don't know, out there. Beyond Green, 7D33. Let's go through a quick rendition of that, and then I'm going to give you some points on sustainability. Hermiston, what do you have on green stuff? What's the critical point out there?
We were just looking at the article, and one of the main points we took away from this is that sustainability can actually add to your bottom line. It shouldn't be thought of some foo-foo concept, you know, some PR foo-foo concept. It's something that can actually benefit you cost-wise and sales-wise.
Right. Okay. I'll edit that later. I got a comment on that. I'm going to come back to LeGrand. Let's go to the back group. Your key issue on green stuff.
Okay.
Yes, no, any?
Well, and even though this is a much more recent article than the previous one, it was funny how they were highlighting BP as kind of long-term investment.
And the latest BP stuff hadn't even happened when this was written.
Yeah, and so it was.
Yeah.
But they did make a good point that even though they do have a history of some environmental problems, even more so now, they, as a company, are putting a larger percentage and a larger amount of capital into alternative fuel research as opposed to ExxonMobil and some of the other ones. So maybe in the long run, even though they don't have necessarily some of the policies in place to prevent current, environmental problems, in the long run they might be the better bet.
Maybe. Yeah.
Maybe.
And if they have these infractions against their rules, and they're not the worst, how bad is it out there in some places? Yeah. Let's move up one and come back to LeGrand and get another comment.
Yeah, we talked about, that rating system. Would they still be rated AA?
Yeah, I don't know.
Or will they change the weight differently? Maybe weight higher the accidents or safety record, and so that would bring them down. I mean, that's the question we have, kind of, is will they change the rating system?
And who gets to do that anyway?
Yeah.
What committee, what governmental entity, or private entity as an overseer? Is it the stockholders that will do that? Or now we get into this issue of governmental intervention versus private intervention, and who's doing that and not, and whether or not that's right or wrong. So, and I have another editorial comment. Let's go to Clackamas.
We were talking about more companies are going green right now, but just the purpose, if they are really going green, or just for profits or social impacts. And as a company, we find it it's hard for them as well, because one side they need to get their profits, and the other side they need thinking about go green. So it's kind of hard for them as well.
Yeah, it is. It's very complicated. Front group LeGrand.
We kind of talked about, kind of similar to Clackamas, that they kind of seem to focus more on the marketing and the reputation of going green and less on the actual, the ethics of it, and the social responsibility, and that can kind of lead to people cheating and just kind of doing the bare minimum to get recognized. Oh, we did this small thing, and but they're actually maybe in the background they work harder to hide these other bad things. So
the Walmart story of the lady who made the decision to just bulldoze the entire store out of Katrina, out in the parking lot, and give it away. They spent, quadruple the amount of money telling the world that she did that than the money that they lost doing that. So it's and yet in about 4 other stores of where they were putting some of their waste product and some of their product that wasn't covered well, they were environmentally doing some bad stuff in other stores, but nobody knew about that until you had Michael Moore going out doing all of his thing, whether that's good or bad or not. So then we got into that other thing. Yeah. So it's how much money are we spending doing what they call greenwashing? Okay, some editorial comments then. On a positive way, I would offer to you Paul Dolan's work with Fetzer Wines. Here's a guy who was certainly able to add to the bottom line and produce a more affordable wine, at the same time. Fetzer Wines went from about $15, $16 a bottle of wine down to $8 and $9, and yet his profit margins overall went up, including a more widely distributed monetary movement to what he called economics, environment, and equity. So he had more environmental programs that cost him more. He had more equity programs like language programs for the migrant farmers, which cost him more. But then on the other hand, they had a building administrative building at Fetzer Wines that was producing more energy than it was costing, you know. And so he had this balancing act going on to where his overall profit margins for Fetzer Wine did increase. So there's a company where you've got that going on. On the other hand, you know, you've got the negative aspects of your comments on, well, did that rate go higher? Are they going to change the rating really? Or did the committee that made that decision to rate them high or low get changed and they were still being bought off? And one would, now, if you listen to Oregon's Secretary of State and his comments on, this was a couple of years ago, on the policies of cap and trade, he had it all worked out to where it wasn't a bad thing. But you talk to the greenies about cap and trade and whether or not a company like BP can buy their way into the good rating from a company who already has good ratings but doesn't have that monetary base that BP does. And so BP uses its money, keeps on doing what it's doing, and they buy their cap and trade stuff. One last comment on that. It's the time that I can tell you that again, the Beatrice Foods General Mills thing versus Interface. And Beatrice Foods General Mills was doing toxic dumping and said, no, we're not, no, we're not. We're meeting EPA standards. And this movie, Class Action, John Travolta, was based on the true stories. And Jan Sickman, the lawyer, was the one that took them to task over that. And he's got some interesting things to say about that. But the societal and national awareness of the bad that Beatrice Foods and General Mills did in letting these people die from the toxic dumping really hurt them. You know, so, but now then, here's an interesting observation. 15 to 20 years later, they're rated in that best 100 companies to work for as one of the greenest, most environmentally friendly companies in the nation. How do you go from killing people with toxic dumping to becoming, I mean, was it really a good change? And did they honestly move from here to here? Or was it a matter of, well, no, they just continued to spend a lot of money advertising how good they were? You know, I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, is there like a watchdog agency out there that
Well,
really
you think the
objectively,
EPA does, but
well, yeah, but I mean that objectively looks at a company and says, yes, they really are green, or no,
right?
You know, they say they are, but they're really not.
And then in our world, you know, we certainly aren't going to go out and buy every one of Michael Moore's films and say that's the answer, that's the answer. You know, although we ought to look at what he says and then look at what his opposers people say and somehow drive our own. Now, if there is advantage, in my opinion, to free markets, and if free markets were not politically manipulated, then we would say the company would rise and fall based on whether the customers are going to buy the product or not. And eventually, if we quit buying because we don't like what they're doing, either in terms of the quality of the product or we don't like what they represent, we still quit buying. Interesting comment about that in my Coeur d'Alene students one time as they kept on, bashing Walmart. A few of my other students said, wasn't that you I saw out there on Sunday afternoon? It's like, oh, well, I saw you over there on Wednesday. It's like, okay, now then, you either shut up about bad-mouthing Walmart or quit going there. So your pocketbooks, your personal pocketbooks, but how do you know? You know, let me get to the one kind. I saw your hand, but the opposite of that was a commitment that John Anderson made from this company called Interface. Now, here was a company that was making a ton of money, right? But this process of making these small 4x4 pieces of rug. Now, if you think about production environments, right, and thinking about making a rug that's on this big roll thing and whether or not it's economically effective and efficient and product of, productions of scale, economies of scale, that if I can make it this big and sell it for this much, I'm going to have a profit margin that's better. And instead of making it this, and so I got more cutting, I got more movement, I got more processes. So the cost has been going up. And also there was something about the dyes that were going on also, and the toxicity in the production process, right? That when they shifted from making it this big to making it this big, in the initial parts of that, their sort of EPA sort of constraints were really getting ratcheted up, and they weren't really looking at that all that much. And so in some employee meetings, some of the employees started questioning the CEO on what they were doing to the environment, even though they were producing an unbelievable product that in the long run was better for everybody. Wouldn't you want to buy a 4-piece or maybe 3-piece rugs, 3-foot rugs that could replace the wear and tear next to that door? Or do you want to replace the carpet in this? Which one's going to save you money as a customer? Now, in terms of profit margins, that goes a long way, but you know, what they were doing was working, but not the customers, but the employees asked the CEO if they could not have a greener, more sustainable company. And he said, what do you mean? And the employee started telling the CEO what the toxicity rates of what they were doing in the plant production process, and he said, I didn't know. He says, I'm just a CEO. I run this, and you guys run the plant. And I was thinking, well, if he didn't know, he should have. But he said, I'll find out. And he began to explore what was really happening. And I don't know what the story is and how long it goes before he made a commitment. And he said, we will change. We will be sustainable at this level of within X amount of time. And he made a commitment. So the profit margins went down a little bit for a while, but then they're back in to being a major carpet producer, and the quality is still up there. But here was one individual who didn't know, who became aware, and made that commitment to saying, I'm not doing this damage to the planet anymore, and still made money doing it. So it can happen, but I don't know. It's just really questionable. Let me stop there for a moment. I'd like for us to take a 10-minute break, and what I'm going to do when I come back is I'm going to share with you 8 pieces of somebody's definition of sustainability. And it gets into some of this stuff of social responsibility and at what point we move from individual operational unit production and effectiveness all the way to things. There was a hand back here somewhere that I lost a minute ago. Are we still there? Did we completely lose you, or?
Yeah, back to, you know, how do you know they're really green? Is there some kind of committee or some kind of whatever? The problem often is as soon as you create one, the stakeholders who have the most to lose make sure they're on it. An example would be like the UN Committee on Human Rights. Iran, make sure they're on it. North Korea, make sure they're on it. And so they, you know, so same thing happens with technology. You know, there's these open source committees or whatever driving certain pieces of technology, and the biggest stakeholders make sure they're on it so they can drive it the way they want. And it goes the same way with, you know, a lot of this stuff. You know, it can be bought, or the biggest stakeholders make sure they're influencing it, and maybe not for the good.
This is not exactly the green issue and the sustainable issue, but in terms of just pure economic exchange and our movement from singular individual decision makings by the haves and the have-nots to collective decision making that moves that decision process to a, quote, greater good concept, right? And I would offer a very similar set of circumstances to 3 organizations, the World Bank, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization, in terms of their stakeholders, you know, or no, stockholders, people who are getting direct monetary benefit as a result of decision processes that are made in those organizations today as opposed to the stakeholder phenomena, where anybody that's impacted by the decisions of those three entities does not have equal access, right? And if you think about this today in terms of just the concept of what they call member nations, who gets to vote and who doesn't, you're exactly right. Those people that have economic vested interest make sure that given political, military, industrial, and economic status in that entity, whatever it is, they make sure that they've got member and voting privilege, right? And they will control the movements of those organizations, as opposed to, here's the question about where society has moved or not, right? And that not at the turn of the century, but in some of the stuff that I've read in the last couple of weeks talks about movement. It might have been Csikszentmihalyi's work in terms of what happens to good performance in good businesses and where decisions used to be made. He said, after World War I and World War II, the whole planet looked at life in a different way, right? And there was more recognition that societal egalitarian distribution was important. And that became some of the words by which World Bank, IMF, and World Trade Organization established its operational rules. And even American business, for a time, operated according to these rules. Time evolves, and as you said, the people who had vested interest in, who gets to make the decisions about whether BP gets raided or not? You're definitely right in that politically, militarily, economically, somebody that has that stockholder vested interest will be in that decision group today. Now, does that mean that that's right? That's what some of these people are saying, that the decision process that's sustainable, if that's all that's there, that may break down. And it may break down faster if that's allowed to continue to happen, because it's going to force the system not to behave in a natural way. I mean, back to biological systems and things like that. Let's take a 10-minute break, and I'll give you then some comments on sustainability. Is that okay? You want a 10-minute break to breathe? been a long time since I've done that. I used to have final exam periods with drinks and pizza. Now I want a cherry chocolate porter. I've been thinking about that ever since I talked to you.
I'm really intrigued about that.
Yeah.
I had,
I'll get you one when we make our next batch, yeah.
that'd be awesome. I went with my dad one time into his brewery supply place, and there's a guy in there talking to him about a beer that he was trying to make, and his was it was chocolate strawberry something.
Mm-hmm. You feel like this mad scientist when you're out there brewing that. Says, okay, I need a little bit more of that malt stuff. It's like, okay, that hops and, okay, it's like.
Different. And one thing right now my dad's doing is experimenting between hop pellets and, the actual leaf hops.
Hmm.
And when he actually knows a guy who grows hops, so he's been getting fresh hops.
Oh.
And I think that's what made the snow melt so good the first time.
Wow.
The difference between fresh hops and frozen ones is indescribable. Like it just makes it so much better.
One of my favorite little side salads is olive oil, mozzarella cheese, and sliced tomatoes with fresh basil.
Really?
And it's just not even the same. If you put this dried basil shake on it, it's like, no, man. Yeah, but that fresh basil just, man, it's like just the aroma hit.
Yeah.
The other day I was at the store and this guy, he saw what was in my basket, and it was like Jack Daniel's ribs or something. And I said, yeah, we'll see. But I have several dishes that I cook with George Dickel, Tennessee bourbon. It's, it's whiskey, but it's like, I don't know, something about George Dickel as opposed to any other brand of, whiskey, And it's like when I first pour that, just a couple of ounces in there, and it hits that olive oil and starts going up. It's like, whoa, this is so nice. I'm really ready to eat that. Yeah. Hey.
I'm going to go through and mark, this is two of Bearden's articles, go through and mark stuff that's appropriate to thermodynamics and stuff like that. I'll highlight it for you. So
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. See, this is like so blasé kind of a thing, but this was more than anything. It was like just saying that entropy is more about disorder than it is about order.
It's about the movement from order to disorder.
Okay, yeah. But that when I talk about this in terms of an organizational contents, it's the protection of that. But you're saying that that's not it unless that existed first, the state of equilibrium, which is sort of not true for most of the organizations that we look at. But if you look at, yeah, yesterday's organization versus what they tell us, which is, I think, a crock of shit.
Well,
You
the
know.
Mandelbrot said, if you look at fractals and chaos theory, then you're looking at types of organizations that are not linear.
Yeah.
Not easily understood with simple kinds of stacked brick kind of things.
Like when you punch that number into a random generation number plan and you see this things kind of popping up.
And that there are unpredicted, from a linear point of view, patterns in nonlinear systems like that.
Yeah, and see, I would not disagree that that's what most systems are like with people because it's a living system. But the fact is that 90% of organizational theory is coming out of that period of time on the scientific school, or what they call the classical or neoclassical school, was this.
Yeah.
And saying the predictability and the control and the structure of that system is what made it successful, which might have been what you're talking about, a system in equilibrium.
Because it was that, all that stuff, second law of thermodynamics, all came out of the steam engine era, when all they could measure was heat. And so they extrapolated that out into rules and stuff like that.
But it's not necessarily,
there are no closed systems.
which I agree with.
And so therefore that whole view doesn't really hold, because you don't have an artificially closed boundary, so you can't lose energy out of the system, because energy can come into the system too. So it's just, the whole picture is way more complicated.
Well, yeah.
But, you know, there are...
Well, it'll be interesting. I know you've kind of heard, I haven't done this with every one of the MBA classes, but I have sometimes. But I'm going to talk about a couple of three of those.
Well, I think entropy to a certain extent.
But still, it might be negative.
Well,
negative entropy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he comes from a chemistry and a
I know what entropy is.
and a
Enthalpy
yeah.
Entropy is always increasing.
Yeah, but it's
if you can isolate it.
Well, but
well, see, that's
also,
what you can use.
There are also
use to prove
experiments
that.
recently where entropy decreased for short periods of time in small areas. Some of the Australian experiments and stuff. So.
But what you were saying about fractals, I've looked at fractals some and stuff. I had an aunt that was actually got a PhD in art and did it on fractals.
Cool.
But you know, you can say it looks like chaos, but it's not.
well, see, that's the point. There is a pattern. There is this, and the two people that one I would like, I don't know if this guy's still around, but I heard George Ainsworth Land. He was a television executive, but he had other background. But he wrote a book called Grow or Die, and he talked about, essentially, it's the Fibonacci spiral imposed on societal movement, and we've talked about that. And then it wasn't necessarily his protege, but they worked together a little bit, a guy named Gus Jakazi, who actually spent a lot of time with Buckminster Fuller, and went one step further, where George Ainsworth Land had the Fibonacci spiral and said, here's your 3 phases of growth that move like this, up and down, and then at this third phase, it either dies or reinvents itself, and it will do that ad infinitum, right? And Jakazi put a 4th one on that, and then had that same growth cycle, and then started predicting success of competitors by taking any 3 or 4 of your competitors and plotting them in this Fibonacci square, and said, where are you, where are they, now where do you want to be? It was pretty amazing stuff, but it was based on some of this, what a business person would say, esoteric work. But it's really solid in terms of looking at predictable behavior, which we would do in economics because it's accepted that we can predict economic behavior, but it's the same kind of math and science and stats that we're doing in org behavior, but we can't do that in org behavior because it's people. Well, buying patterns is not people? You see, it's... So what you were talking about a while ago, I think, is pretty much... I don't think anybody's really, other than Meg Whitley and some others, doing serious connecting of, you know, quantum mechanics and chaos theory and complexity theory and systems theory and organizational analysis. The study of people's behavior inside an organization with this kind of tool. Let's go talk to Jim. We'll get Shannon here one way or the other. Yeah. Wow. Okay, let's come back. I see my Hermiston group, but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be owning you. I see our collective group, and I see some faces still here, some not here, unless you change seats. I apologize. I'm going to make a change in the order of what I just said because it fits more with where I think, and then you may not like this, I don't know, but I talked about sustainability. It's still on my list. But given social responsibility and stuff, I'd like to make a few comments about the Sarbanes-Oxley, you know, as we move into because we're talking about the green stuff, is it good or bad, who gets to make the decision or not, and whether or not you're in agreement with those decisions and whether or not it works. Legally it works, ethically and morally I don't know. So here's the order for the next hour or so. I'm going to talk about sort of a societal struggle and why I think business people are having some difficulty with this. I've kind of alluded to that off and on over the evening, but I'll start with that. We'll hit Sarbanes-Oxley. Then I'm going to talk about the sustainability stuff, and then I'll finish up with the crises. Read a quote to you first. May or may not make sense. This is again from Csikszentmihalyi. That's how it's a Hungarian name, but he's a clinical psychologist, the one that I continue to read and to look at individual high performance and collective high performance in. His business book is one called Good Business. The manager who does not set some time aside for reflection every day is likely to be headed for a burnout. And the manager who does not actively protect his subordinate's psychic energy from being disrupted is going to have a frustrated staff. That's jumping ahead to next time we're together on leadership, and we will talk about meditation of all things, you know, and where that may not fit. It's interesting in my work with variations of people, I would never use that word if I was meeting with a group of Christian businessmen, and I'd probably never use that word when I go to the Puyallup Fire Department, you know, and we might talk about prayer groups, and then we might talk about getting on your four-wheel and going hunting, you know, as your means of shutting down. But National Center for Creative Leadership and many, many others have done studies ad nauseum that one of the aspects of people that are moving into this can you hold the fire thing always have a way to shut their minds down for a while. And I'm not so sure Buckminster Fuller did that when he stayed awake except for 2 or 3 hours a night. But I'd be willing to bet that there was some place in his life even that you would find him shut down. You know, and so we don't give ourselves permission to do that. And I don't know how you define that. Whatever your political, ideological, spiritual sort of background is, my suggestions are you to go find that. Whether you run, you walk, you eat yourself to meditation, or you have that. But I think it's absolutely necessary to shut the noise out. And that quiet space that you have is what might be the very thing that allows you to be the person who can hold that fire for your organization. So that was a comment. Sarbanes-Oxley, why do we have that? Now, again, this may be controversial given your particular ideological persuasion. And certainly the capitalist among us and those people that are legalistic in our framing of how things are okay would say that, all right, we don't have any particular legal points of view that high executive compensation and I read an article the other day by a gentleman who was on a board of directors, and they were funding various organizations. And he came away from that questioning whether or not his funding organization should continue to fund the organizations that they did, because he thought that morally it was not a good thing to fund organizations whose average executive salary was 435 times the average salary of the average employee in organizations. He felt some wrongness about that. You may not. Now, on one set of ethical, moral, valuing standards, utilitarian reasoning, Kantian reasoning, some kind of philosophical reasoning process, is it okay for an individual to be rewarded for work that they produce? Well, obviously that's okay in a utilitarian world, if that's the measurement of performance. And so, therefore, the laws that we have and the definition of corporation, now this is a question whether or not the corporation as a legal entity should be held accountable for its own behavior. I think they should. But our corporate laws and regulations do not hold corporations legally accountable for their behavior, because they say that charter puts that obligation someplace else, right? Now, what I did not know until after some conversations with Professor Day is that the accounting world, many, many years ago, started feeding our own legislatures some rules and regulations by which they thought we should be more fiduciary responsible to a larger number of people rather than one or two. So this stuff that came out of Enron, essentially, I think it came out of some earlier things, starting with the Texas savings and loan scandals, and said somebody saying, you know, I'm not quite so sure that this unequal distribution of resources is good for everybody, especially if I'm taking money out of your pocket to put in mine, right? If I put money in my pocket but didn't take it out of your pocket, that's one thing. But if I took it out of yours to put in mine, that may be questionable. And so Sarbanes-Oxley, for the accounting profession, which the folks who were feeling, you know, their professional obligations more seriously than others, began to push this. And so we say the executive compensation, the misuse of corporate funds, insider trading, the misrepresented earnings, the concealing of where this money is or not, non-independent boards, things like, so the person who is counting their till and putting money in and out of that gets to count their till at the end of the day. It's like, well, no, that's not exactly cool, is it? You know, so that kind of thing. Non-accountable CEOs, transactions in short terms as opposed to long term. You think about the movie Pretty Woman, you know, and where we're buying and selling money and buying and selling money, and I'm making a lot of it, but that company that just went out of business but made one person a lot of money, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And non-independent accounting firms. Those were some of the rationales behind how the Sarbanes-Oxley happened. Now, I'm not quite so sure that this is consistent, because corporate responsibility as an end result of Sarbanes-Oxley sort of sits at odds with the continued legal definition of corporation. So it's a lawyer's dream come true. You know, on one hand, you've got Sarbanes-Oxley that says this is what you get to measure performance and legality on, and on the other hand, you still have a definition legally of corporation, where another set of lawyers said, no, 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 you're not going to hold me accountable because the legal definition of corporation says I'm not held accountable. But Sarbanes-Oxley says I'm going to hold you accountable. So you've got a lawyer's dream here in fighting this out. Consequently, my personal opinion is that that's why you didn't see much resolution, you know, in the world that we know as a result of the stuff that happened with the GM and the banks. They weren't able to resolve that. Whether or not you agree that that should have been a private matter or that should have been a government. And that's an argument, you know, who gets to make those rules. So we have that. So what we were trying to get out of Sarbanes-Oxley, and then again, I'm not quite sure where this came from, but it came at a point to where I started having some conversations with Professor Day, our new accounting instructor, and she's got some background in having researched and worked with this Sarbanes-Oxley stuff as an accountant. So we're hoping that you have increased regulation. Ah, well, that's controversial in itself. We want to deregulate, not regulate. But if deregulation is detrimental to any group of people, we're a democratic nation and we're looking at the benefit of everybody, not just one group or another. So regulations that would help us deal with that might be a more stringent auditing process, whereas you don't just say, go study it. Well, okay, well, how? Corporate responsibility, increased disclosure. Oh, actually, I would have to add here, it's somewhere in my notes, about the EU. One of the regulations that all new members into the European Union have to abide by is something called transparency. Now, older member nations somehow have skated this and they're still not disclosing everything, but one of the benefits we hope to have seen, yes or no, of the Sarbanes-Oxley was more disclosure and more transparency in public organizations. And increased regulations, criminal penalties. Well, against what? Again, legally, these folks that we're irritated that make 435 times the amount of money that you and I make irritates us, but is it legal? Yeah. Is it moral and ethical? According to whose views? According to whose values? And so I don't have the answers. I got some personal opinions about that. And then some kind of professional responsibility for the activities of accountants and attorneys and quasi-professionals like mediators who are involved in helping us look at all of this. And I offer name to be unmentioned, but law firm that my son worked for in Portland before he moved to the firm that he worked for in Boise, then went back to Oregon. But he had some trying times in talking to me about his continued involvement with this huge tax firm, and said, I don't know if I am legally culpable for what is happening, but I know that these things are being done inside the firm with the partners in the way that they are representing the tax posture, the tax position of some of our clients, right? And 2 weeks after my son left this organization, 2 of the partners were indicted by the IRS and the feds for the kind of stuff that they were doing with some of their clients. That's the kind of thing that we would hope that Sarbanes-Oxley, and we would like to say that it's in all of our best interest to regulate the kind of thing that is damaging to all of us, you know. So, but I don't know. It's like it definitely is a question about your frame of reference. Is it a legal frame of reference? Is it a moral frame of reference that is outside of the legalistic laws and regulations? And how do we look at that? And how do we value that as we make decisions about our work? So that's the Sarbanes-Oxley take. I was like, couldn't like woebegone. I'd like comments back from you. Yes, ma'am.
Well, in part too, a little bit about the CPA profession is that they're one of the professions that are self-regulating. And you have to, once you pass the CPA exam, excuse me, you have to take an ethics exam, basically. And now the way it is that every 2 years when you report your continuing ed, you have to have so many hours of ethics in there, which covers some of the things that were that you were just talking about in there. Sarbanes-Oxley to me was more or less trying to protect the Joe public from what was going on in the companies, because I mean there's some real interesting things in that. I worked for a company one time that wasn't a public company, but I was asked not to use my CPA designation And at that point
Because
in time,
if you did,
because if I did at that point in time, I was ethically responsible for what I did.
you were holding that particular organizational unit accountable for your standards as.
I was.
But if you didn't use that.
If I did not use the designation, then I could put things that were on the expense account and put them up as in the assets because they're both debits. But is it ethical? No. Did it fly past the bank? No. But those are the kind of things that you sort of have to temper everything with. So when you read the Sarbanes-Oxley, there's a whole like
it's great.
Professor. Yeah, there's a whole lot more to it.
Right.
Why did this happen? Why did they include that in there? And
right.
there is some good things that came out of there. They used to have there used to be something called push the button. In other words, when I would work with something like QuickBooks and I was helping do journal entries for a client, could I push the button because that produces financial statements?
And then you're accountable because you're the one that pushed the button.
And then I am producing, right, and
as opposed to having the client push the button.
Exactly.
Right.
So part of what Sarbanes-Oxley did was clear that up too, is the fact that yeah, I can. Because I can push the button.
But your signature is on the line at that point.
No, there's no letter. I can hand them to the client, and the client's going to use them personally, and that's okay. But if I push the button and I know they're going to take it to the bank,
knowledge base.
Yeah, I'm off.
Let me throw this question at all of you about the ethical component that I still struggle with greatly, and some probably because of my own personal background, but I'm firmly committed to a set of moral values. I'd like to think that I am. I was on the charter board for a group called Management, Spirituality, and Religion in the Academy of Management, and looking at professional and ethical standards for college teachers and business teachers and what we do and what we don't, and whether or not spirituality or personal values, whatever you call it, are a part of who we are, which some of us think that they are and should be included. Ethical positioning and moral positioning included. Now, we, like you, are a self-regulated body, much less so than you, because in order to be an accountant, you have to have a CPA. In order to be a doctor, you have to have a certificate. In order to be a teacher, you have to have a certificate. In order to be a manager, you don't, right? And so it's questionable whether or not we need to even play the game or not. Right? I'm not a certified professional manager. I don't have a CPM, and well, that designation is kind of out there. But as a teacher am I a body, and I'm a member of the same profession? Well, yeah, and some of us hold that very true. Now, I told you about this the first night that we were together. There are two grading organizations for colleges of businesses. One is called the American Assembly of Collegiate Schools of Business, and the other one's called the International Assembly of Collegiate Schools of Business, yada, yada, yada. I mean, they do different things. Both of them have this standard that you're talking about, that they compel us to teach ethics. Okay, fine. Now, my question of you is that, how do I measure that? How can I say, and you tell me that it's a self-regulated thing, you have to take these classes, so therefore, I'm going to give you a class on ethics, and I'm going to make everybody give back to me an awareness and a knowledge base of utilitarian reasoning, Kantian reasoning, moral reasoning, philosophical understanding, awareness, and you pass the test, and you go take a class on that every year, and you pass the test, and you still push the button. Are you ethical? No, but you told somebody else that I passed the test. I'm really questioning how we do this. I mean, how do we get to the point to where my behavior, what I do, not what I say, has some goodness that I'm not hurting people along the way? You know, does that make sense? It's still a real struggle with me. I don't know where we go with this. But you're right. The organizations like accountants, like professional organizations, and colleges of business being one of them, who have recognized that we have an obligation to have people think about not hurting others along the way. And how we get to saying that's a part of our profession is very important. And I think we need to continue to struggle with that. I don't know how we measure it, though.
You know, in some way, I think by not talking about it, by not pointing it out, by not questioning what's ethical and what's not ethical, that if we did not do that, we would put it under the carpet, we wouldn't be talking about it, and then it becomes very, very faint.
Non-observation is condolence and compliance and allowance.
That used to be that, yeah. But by bringing it up and saying, is this, and questioning it, I mean, everybody has to make their own choices.
Right.
You know, for the ethical, for the religion, for the moral. But to
Whatever
have it
that
out in front and say, by the way, remember ethical,
yeah,
remember moral.
It's a step.
I think that is, yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's a
think
step
it
in
is.
that
I
right
think it's a
direction.
step
Comment
back
to other
in a way.
folks on this. I mean, she and I are carrying on this conversation, and I know it's like it's you know, everybody else certainly welcome to join in or tell us to change the subject and we move on or whatever.
Well, how do you weigh morality? I mean, what is the scale? What is used? I mean,
yeah,
I think that's always a question, and not talking about it, you know, sweeping it under the carpet type thing. It's not out front. It's not part of the conversation. So long as it's part of the conversation, there's some safety in that, if you will. And you know.
See, I would rather us go there. I would rather us have too much information on the table, affording everybody that I respect your capacity to deal with this, rather than I'm going to withhold it from you because I know better than you. But if we both talk about it, then we're both aware and we can deal with that. Maybe. And I would rather go there than making the position that some get it and some don't. Some get the information and some don't. Or sweeping it under the table and not making us aware. It's not a women's issue. It's I'm going to hire one woman and pay her a whole bunch of money, and statistically the problem goes away, but end of story. You know, it's like we're not aware anymore. But, or do you say it is a problem, there is a salary differential, what do we do about that? Now everybody's aware. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to shift. I'm going to go to sustainability. Let me tell you where I say where this is coming from. One is from the book on sustainability and leadership, the guy from Canada. I didn't write this down. Where is this coming from? I'll have to go back into my books and see. Great sustainable leadership. Now we're jumping way ahead 2 weeks from now, but I'm going to give you the leadership things about great sustainability, and then I'm going to give you sort of 8 points of just kind of what sustainability may be, what this means to somebody else. So if I want to create long-term capacity, I want this organization to be around for some time. What characteristics would I look for in the others that are doing it? Or what characteristics would I want to model, if I could, if a leader can learn that whole issue of are you born with it or are you not? You know, what are the traits of those? But here's 5 things that could be that are needed for sustainable leadership. One is unbounded optimism. I mean, it's like that's hard work to be excited over and over and over again every day. And do you have anybody that's around like that? I was sharing with John earlier tonight a story. My wife and I were listening to one of those left-wing liberal channels on the radio, you know, and there was a librarian that they were talking to that was doing some just absolutely unbelievable stuff in a middle school. And she was asked the question of what it's like today. I mean, you know, given the complexity of this virtual world that we live in, you think about what's going on in libraries and everything. And she said, these are the most exciting times. It's wonderful. And you could just hear, we listened to this lady for about 45 minutes talking about what she's doing in the library. Librarians are absolutely great. And you just got excited listening. You say, I want to go back and be a middle school kid again just to be in her library. And then one of the stories that she was told, and I don't know how far your memory goes back of this technology boom that we're in, but some of us can remember, 28K modems, right? And Telnet on your phone, and 300-yard cords that attached it to this or that. And she told a story about one of her first uses of technology to get kids on the internet, and it was one of those big old cumbersome modems and a couple of 100 feet of phone cord that plugged the K230 whatever it is and this or that into the phone in her office and trudged the cord down to the library, and it was Brown University or someplace like that, was giving free internet to all the libraries. Everybody else was paying astronomical fees just to punch the button, much less get online and get this slow internet connection to talk to somebody on the internet. And she talked about how exciting that was and said, kids, are we going to get online today and talk to somebody else? And you can just hear her saying forevermore the unbounded energy that she had and the enthusiasm and the passion that she had. That's tough work. But there's folks out there that have it. That's one characteristic. Integrity. The opportunity for mutual trust. And this is coming from, I can quote you sources and sources. This will be it will be certainly a whole week of discussion in this class on sustainable leadership. The work of Barry Posner in his book on the credibility factor, the work of Barbara Kellerman in what she calls bad leadership, and where we have lost that. Immaterial of what your belief is or not, all of these people are saying we as a people have lost our faith in those other people who have designated themselves as our leaders because they've told us that they would behave this way, and we've trusted that. And we've lost our faith in that because they're not doing that anymore. And that's not sustainable leadership. Sustainable leadership is where you continue to interact with the folks and they continue to trust you. So, unbounded energy, integrity, ambition with perseverance. And you say, well, let's be humble about things. Well, no, there's a point in time where false humility is not going to work. If you don't have the ambition, well, maybe that's where if it ain't broke, break it. I don't think so, because ambition doesn't necessarily mean create at the cost of everything. It just means you're excited about something and you've got the ambition to keep on pushing buttons, out there. In the model that I teach on personal power, I don't use the word perseverance. I use a slight variation on that has clinical derivations in settings where people are emotionally and mentally unstable, and that's this perseveration. It's the same kind of thing, but perseverance is like, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Perseveration is very, very uncomfortable. It's stuck behavior. But you're so insanely ambitious about something that you're so stuck that nothing's going to get in your way. Everybody's telling you no, 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 and you're saying yes, 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 yes. And no matter how many times you get told no, your ambition is still out there. You're perseverating. And that's really uncomfortable for a lot of people. But that's a technique, not a technique. It's a style. I don't know where it comes from, but it's sustainable. And until something really strong gets in the way of stopping that perseverating activity, you're going to keep on going. So constant curiosity. And now that's an interesting one, because in our classical school of management, right, or neoclassical or scientific, depending on how far you go back, we're told that success in business comes out of stability, rigidity, and all those organizational structures that were predictable. And yet now I'm telling you that sustainability is not that. It's curiosity. It's that innovation. Where does that come from? Now there's two schools of thought on that. One is that in about 9 out of 10 management tech books, you'll find a place that tells you that innovation and creativeness comes from abundance. You have total resources. That's that Paul Allen concept of when he started the company Starwave. Deep pockets, total abundance. Those guys got all the money in the world, all the resources in the world, all the code. What new machine do you want? I'll get it for you. You know, go create new code for me. Total abundance. That works. You know, now, is that synonymous with curiosity? Maybe. But the other concept of that, okay, once upon a time I taught a class on the phenomenon of power, and this particular one, and this story comes from a time when I had about 60 or 80 students. I don't know what the number was. It was a summer class. I had students from the nursing department, students from the social department, students from the business department, students of a real healthy blend of diversity students, and one was a Japanese young man. And I was going around the room writing words on the board. Now, yes, I can do it. John, I'm going to come to, here's paper. Not for the whiteboard. I wrote this word on the board. Because I was asking them to give me one word that defined the concept of power. What is power? The ability to do something. And I thought he said this word. Everybody with me? So I'm going around the room, and about 4 people later, he actually gets up to the board. He goes up to the board and he said, "I'm sorry, Professor, you didn't get it right. This is what I said." Do you see the difference? What he said was it wasn't the abundance that created power. It's the fact that I didn't have it. You took it away from me. You deprived me of it. You made me do it over and over and over again, and I don't have any physical sensation left. I don't have any mental left. There's absolutely nothing left, but I'm going to do it anyway, you know. And that's pretty powerful stuff. So where does sustainability come from? Abundance? Sure. If we don't have the tangible resources, can I sustain it? Maybe, maybe not. But it's also this. Okay, I'm coming off of that, John. Thank you. And there's actually D.T. Suzuki, not Zenru Suzuki, who is of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind fame, but D.T. Suzuki, who is one of the great Japanese literary scholars, in some of his work on the myths, legends, and realities of Japanese history, has a story that he calls the School of 100 Fights in a samurai traditions. And the teachers would just make them do it over and over and over again until they literally just could not even get up anymore, and then they would make them do it one more time. And then if they did it one more time and survived, then they were passed on, given the sword that the master had forged themselves, and the spirit of the master went with the student because they did it when nothing was left. And that's hard work. How many of us can do that, right? I don't know. And this concept of constant curiosity is sustainable. I don't know where we get it, but those people that have it are going to be the ones that help carry us into the future. And then last, empathy and mutual respect. You know, that we, in spite of the tenacity for singular action, you've got somehow a way that you're going to bring folks along. The story that I just told, listen to what that tells you about the relationship between the master and the student. On one hand, the master was so incredibly pushing to make the student perform and perform and perform. On the other hand, then if you know about forging a sword, right, and the metalwork therein, and there's these whole things about my soul is being poured, this master had created his own sword and forged it and gave it to the student as they left. Mutual respect. So you've got this real interesting, I'm in control, I dominate, but let's do it together, you know, kind of a thing. So that's leadership. That's sustainable, maybe. There's lots of others that can be told. We'll move into that at a couple of weeks. But now then, let me give you 8 points of a definition of sustainability. Now again, this is coming from a man who wants to sustain good education in Canada. So his end result, and we asked about this a couple of weeks ago in terms of how do we define what you do for your projects, how do you define any of this stuff, and some of it's knowing the purpose of what you're going to do anyway. His purpose was to provide good, sustainable education for Canada. And so as such, he wanted to come up with a definition of what sustainability anyway. And so this was his exploration of that. One, it is of public service and moral purpose. Now, you can agree or not agree with that, right? And if you are of the particular persuasion that business is valueless, it's just a matter of profit maximization, then you're not going to like this particular point of view about sustainability. Business is about making money and producing profits. Yeah, but I don't know. How do we sustain that? He says that you must transcend individuals. Individuals by themselves can't keep making profit. And at some point, the collective is the one that's going to do it. So sustainability is moral purpose and public service within the larger context of that organization. Not individuals, but the larger group. Two, it's always about a changing context. Now, I got this struggle here going on with myself thinking about it's not a matter of it's going to change and change and change and change and change. John, I'm going to come back to this. If you are so interested, email me, ask me about this. I can give you the citations and tell where to go. There's a man who is a, quote, systems thinker. And that, I'm going to throw out a name or two to you. And it's, again, you don't have to memorize them. If you're interested in this line of thinking, holler at me. There's a system thinker named Alfred North Whitehead. There's another one named Bertalanffy. But this one is a guy named George Ainsworth Land. He wrote a book called Grow or Die. And he says, we all learn this way. I'll also offer to you something that you might have come across in one of your classes from Alvin Toffler, Agricultural, Industrial, and Information Age. Society has moved that way. Well, this guy roughly equivalates our growth, both individually and collectively, in a growth cycle like this. That in that agricultural age, we accumulated knowledge. In that industrial age, we duplicated it. And actually, it was more like that. And then in this information age, that the system basically either died or reinvented itself right here. Now, what's interesting is that this growth and learning cycle right at this point repeats itself over and over and over again. And that any system that you look at as a living system is going to stay alive forever. Life, death, and resurrection. It just grows and dies and grows and dies and grows and dies, and it'll keep on going, as opposed to it keeps on changing and changing and changing and changing. And there's a pattern in that. So I'm going to come back to that. It's kind of an esoteric thing, you know, but if we look at Jack Welch's comment, if the rate of change outside the organization is faster than the rate of change inside the organization, the end is in sight. This concept of sustainability falls down if a system breaks. You don't want it to break. It's not going to break because life will change. It's not going to stop. The planet's not going to blow up. Well, you know, if you're a radical environmentalist, you think it may blow up pretty soon, you know, but it's going to be here for a while, and it will keep on moving, you know. 3, lateral capacity. Lateral capacity. Now, I look at an organizational evaluation from a couple of 3 perspectives. Now, watch, if we think about this traditional organizational pyramid, it hadn't gone away. It's not going to go away for a while. So we have hierarchical boundary spanning. You understand? From top to middle to bottom, communication and flow will go up and down the organization. That's one way of measuring what's happening. And another way is I'm going to move outside. I'm going to put a circle around. You with me? Here's the boundary of the organization. Now, there's this thing out there called boundaryless. When you guys have been talking about the virtual organizations right? Where do the boundaries start breaking around? The racial, gender, other kinds of boundaries, cultural boundaries, technological boundaries, legal boundaries. They're breaking. Products are moving in and out of that boundary. So a second way of looking at organizational performance is where the products are crossing the boundary. I'm still not to the one that this guy says is a characteristic of a sustainability. Hierarchical movement, a boundary movement, but within the constraints of whatever organization, system, nation, state, culture, society, however you define that, the lateral movement across the functions or the various components is what he's talking about. If you don't do that, if you don't get across that, then it's not going to be sustainable. You've got to work across the lateral movement, which means that somehow your reliance on top-down or a separation of haves and have-nots and letting those member nations, like you were talking about, those people will ingratiate themselves into the decision process. This guy says that's going to work for so long, but sustainability will come at the point to where this becomes this, and it's accepted within the decision framework. So we have public service, moral purpose, changing context, lateral capacity, and as our accounting profession and some of our other professions and the EU in their infinite wisdom implying or imposing a standard of transparency on us talks about accountability. The system must assume responsibility for its own actions. Okay? I've talked about Sonny Carter a lot. He's an astronaut that we were able to get to come speak, and actually he was, anybody familiar with the Boy Scouts? Some of you are. I've talked to some of you individually. This astronaut that's been up in space was the person that issued my son his Eagle challenge. And I had tears when he said it because I thought he was talking to me, you know. And he said, Bill, seek accountability. I thought, man, what an amazing thing to tell a 13-year-old kid. Seek accountability. Be responsible for what you do. And he said, sustainable organizations, sustainability must have that as a part of what it is. The system must own itself and seek responsibility for what it does. If it doesn't, it will break down eventually. Fifth, which y'all talked about in one of these articles, and when I gave you the opposing viewpoint of radical change, right, as the way that some action happens, sustainability, according to this guy from Canada, seems to work more incrementally. And the ability to continually look for improving your faults. You know, those people that are looking at, that have studied quality control, like Sigma 6 stuff programs, our total quality management and Deming's 14 points, it's always about continually being willing to look at failure and correct the next failure. Maybe not all of them, but always looking at correcting a little bit at a time, never giving up on, you know, well, I was shooting 3 for 5, now can I shoot 4 for 5? You know, from that kind of thing. Make a little bit of improvement, you know, continuous quality improvement. A paradox on the short-term profit and loss modality. He didn't give up on that. You hear a lot of phraseology in the Japanese management programs, and when you get into some more esoteric sort of relationships of values, and you hear about the Native American seventh generation concept, you know, and what we're doing for our grandchildren. So those people that didn't think about the long-term perspectives are not where they need to be. This guy says, yeah, that's true, but if you can't pay the bills today, if your profits are such that you can't pay the salaries, you're still being irresponsible. So sustainability is both. It's the ability to pay the bills today and have a business that will last, into 7 generations. So it's both, not just one or the other. The thing that I mentioned about that growth cycle, and that this thing will reinvent itself ad nauseum, he talks about sustain is to keep up the cyclical. Actually, to sustain means to keep up. And so it's a recognition that that kind of thing does exist. What just came to my mind was a war company that somehow understood the cyclical nature of business and reinvented itself. They made munitions. And at the end of World War II, what might you think would happen to that business? You know, if they're not recognizing all of these factors of sustainability in a business sense, that business, looking at market conditions, at world conditions, at societal changes, might go out of business. Yes? No? Probably. Now, what you might not be aware of is that, yeah, that particular organizational line went out of business. And I don't know what the name of the product is now, but that company is still in business producing ovenware and kitchenware. You got this pot that used to be a bomb, and now this pot's a pot, right? A cyclical nature of life, death, and resurrection. And, you know, yeah, we accumulated, we duplicated, we got out there, and it worked for a while, and now then that market is over, but what do? We either die or we keep going. They kept going. Those little trivia piece of information about Harley Davidson is that their military contracts is that they actually have a line that produces some bombshell casings. And you said, what in the world has that got to do with making a motorcycle? In the tool and die metals manufacturing, if you look at some particular parts of their engine mountings and coverings, it's almost very similar. So they retool a little bit and produce a different product line. Not many people know that, but now then you look at sustainability, Harley's going to be around for a while for a lot of reasons. And last, that quote that I read earlier about Burns' transformational leadership, looking beyond myself, looking as a leadership phenomena that I understand who you are, I'm listening to you, and my leadership as a long-term capacity building is not just about leading me and benefiting me. It is truly a transformational thing, and that's his 8th characteristic of sustainability, that there are leaders within the system that are recognizing that it's not just about me and my personal gain, but what I do derives benefit for everybody. And so those are his 8 characteristics of a definition of sustainability. Comments, questions, observations that you may have?
Bullets for the last 3?
One is public service, moral purpose. If you want, I haven't digitalized this yet, but I can tell you where it comes from and give you the name of the book and also digitalize it. But 1 is moral purpose, public service. 2 was changing learning organizations. 3 was lateral capacity. 4 was accountability and transparency. 5 was continuous quality improvement. 6 was short-term, long-term. 7 was understanding cyclical sustaining, that it is a very cyclical movement, always, you know, learning, accumulating, reaching capacity, and then what happens. And then 7 was leadership as a transformational activity. Those are necessary components of what he calls sustainability. Actually, that was page 1 of 3 pages of notes for tonight. Obviously, we're not making it through all 3 pages. I have one more thing on my agenda. Actually more, but I'm not going to get us that far. 2, systems. So which one do I want to do? Are you guys fried yet? I'm sorry. You're going to have to bear with me a few minutes longer. Take a deep breath, relax. I won't subject this to all of my notes. I will, I'm trying to figure out which one may fit with 2 weeks from now in terms of leadership, management of crisis and tribulation, or systems thinking. Let me just throw out a few characteristics of systems to you, and then we'll deal with Bill Scott's article later, adding that to the mix. Let me ask you a question or two as I preface something called systems thinking. I would define, let me make a couple of statements. I'm going to define what we do working with groups, big groups, little groups, public groups, agencies, for-profit groups, non-profit groups. All of the above is still an organization that's a system. And it's a complicated thing because the management of that system is a matter of understanding the inputs, what's coming into that, messing around with them a bit, and producing something on the other end. That's your job. Whether it's a service that you're providing, a product that you're producing, any of the above. So we probably should have some awareness of how a system behaves. Now, in schools of business and schools of management, we've broken that up into funnels of thinking. If I understand the rules and regulations of marketing, price, product, promotion, placement, I can run a system. If I understand management, planning, organizing, controlling, directing, leading, I can run a system. If I understand accounting, assets equals plus liabilities plus, I can run a system. If I understand finance and understand liquidity and leverage and 14 different ratios, I can run a system. Maybe in my world of things that are not quite so concrete, study of the people's behavior, if I understand motivation and leadership, I can run a system. Well, there's other people that say it's a little bit more complicated than that, and that systems have this way of behaving. Our friends in the sciences, chemistry and physics and biology, look at living systems in a different way than we do. These systems theorists have taken a lot of that and put it into the way that we look at organizations and said, you need to be aware of these things because this system of living things interacts in ways that you haven't thought about. It's not simply about price, product, promotion, and placement. It's not simply about planning, organizing, directing, controlling. It's about some other stuff. So now then, here's the question. As you look at this boundaried thing, a company, an organization, a club, a church, a school, right? A health agency. I'm going to put a boundary around it and ask you this question. Is that boundary one that's open and fluxing and permeable, the things move in and out of it, or was I able to close the door and say, get away, I'm sufficient unto myself, that's it, I understand. Is it closed or is it open? Comments, questions, thoughts on that? Some of you I know have knowledge here based on your backgrounds that can answer this question. Feel free to jump in and throw something to the conversation, and then we'll move it to some thoughts on what are some traits or characteristics of this thing. Help me. Does any of what I said make any sense at all to you? Or Ramey's out ranting again. Do you understand that there are systems out there and that we need to understand how that system, whatever it is, behaves? Let me jump into a cultural statement of closed or open. The Mennonites and the Quakers might feel like that the systems that they live in are closed. And study this. They've got that society. They dress a certain way. They don't want anybody coming into their society, and they don't want anybody leaving it. You go out there into the world, and you're going to get tainted. And we don't want the world coming in here. We make all of what we need. We make all of our food. We make all of our clothes. We've got these farms that go on, and that's okay. It works. That's a closed system, yes? Maybe. This watch is a closed system. It operates sufficient unto itself. It does everything it needs to do without anything leaving it. But information's leaving it. What came into it? Nothing, right? Yeah, but yes? Yeah, well, this one needs a battery. So it's not closed, right? It's open. So it's not sufficient unto itself at the point to where part of it breaks, it needs something outside of itself to operate. Does that make sense? And in these people's mind, Bert Lanfey, Alfred North Whitehead, George Land, other folks, and many, many, many others, they would say there is no such thing as a closed system. It's all open.
It's a closed system until something within the system breaks down and then it needs to open up. I mean, I would think an open system would be something like a solar-powered watch or something like that.
Okay.
Where energy is coming from an external source. So, I mean, things can function as a closed system temporarily and then, as need be, open up to outside influences.
How long is temporary and who defined the needs be?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Mennonites and the Quakers, I mean, they essentially keep to themselves, but, I mean, they live on the same planet with us. And so if we destroy the atmosphere, forget their closed system.
So there is interaction, even in the closed system, with people outside of the closed system.
Yeah, and in some avenues and caveats.
Yeah.
But socially or, agriculturally or whatever, they can function to some degree within the closed.
Even in varying degrees, the point being that you just answered one of the characteristics of this system, and it does, at some point, interact outside of itself. Yeah. And if we shut that down, right, and say, I ignore even the very slight chance that at some point when it needs be, if I've ignored that and boundaried the organization, chances are that at some point the system will break permanently. So a characteristic of the open system is that at some point it will interact. Now those of us that deal in the corporate world, I think probably have a perpetual interaction. You're always getting raw material with which to make what you make, and you're always giving it out to an externality. So there's a perpetual interaction in and out of the system, along with technological environments, legal environments, social environments, and now then global environments, diversity environments. And to ignore all that ignores the potential of successful, sustainable living. Synergy is another characteristic. I use the statement 2 + 2 = 5. How many of you have been on a group or a committee, though, where you did everything and 4 people didn't do anything, and even though there were 2 people and 2 more people, you produced the work of 3 because you were doing all of it, or most of it, and it really wasn't 2 + 2 = 5. It was negative synergy, and it's 2 + 2 = the work of you and one other. You get that? How many of you have truly, truly been a member of an organization where 2 people here got together with 2 people there and produced an unbelievably creative thing that would never have happened unless the talents and the skills and the passions of dissimilar parts, symbiosis, right, is the coming together of dissimilar parts as a whole unit. There's a French scientist named Serres who's done stuff on parasitic relationships. And we often think, get rid of all the parts that don't work. Yeah, be careful. Because it may well be the parts that don't work are contributing. Contribution margins in accounting or finance. I don't know if that's an accounting term or a finance term. But if you think about the profit centers that are not necessarily high-end on producing all the profits, but they're making a contribution in some elements. The contribution margins of these operational units are producing the whole. But you get rid of the ones that aren't heavy profit centers, you may have just got rid of some of the very elements that are contributing to the success of the whole. Think about that. Synergy is an interesting characteristic. So basically it says this, look at the whole and not only each individual part, because when the parts come together, they're going to behave differently. Does that make sense? You know, y'all still alive out there? Okay? Couple, three more here. More than one way to do things. Now, there's a particular word that they use. Systems thinkers call it equifinality, but don't worry about that. Just think that there's more than one way to do things. You think, is it relevant or not? Well, you bet it is, especially when you're talking about the rigidity of management style that says, singularly, I tell you what to do, when to do it, how to do it, but obviously that's not working anymore, right? And there needs to be some shift in response to what's going on out there, but I'm not going to let you do it because we all know that that's the only way to do it. Well, we never did it that way before, so no, you can't change. And you just kill the system, right? Because your lack of recognition that there's more ways to do this, all right? Two more. I'm coming back to the pictures and drawing. I'm not trying to draw Batman here. This is a trampoline, okay? And this is the structure of a trampoline. Now, what is the purpose of a trampoline? It's to let people jump on it. So the answer to this, or the partially look at this, is that this concept of what I call moving balance, the paradox of moving and balancing at the same time, is definitely a characteristic of that. And they call it dynamic equilibrium, the equilibrium of structural integrity and balance. That goes back to our classical, neoclassical school of management. I just drew the structural integrity of the trampoline. Now, the purpose of a trampoline is to bounce. So we have a person bouncing on a trampoline, and this thing in the middle is going up and down, right? So we have moving balance, and it's doing what it's supposed to do. Does that make sense? Okay? Now, we can be not picture challenged and come off of that and think about this for a moment. What do you think would happen if I have proponents or people in this organization that are advocating one or the other? And let's say that there's a real strong group of people that are what you might call structuralists. The centralized, rigid, singular decision makers that say, you know, the form, the rigidity of our organizational structure, the decision, A gets to talk to B, gets to talk to C, and we got to talk to that person in that department over there, but they can't do this. It's got to go up and down this way. The structural integrity has to be maintained, and that's all that exists. So with the trampoline, you know, we say, you know what? That thing is too moving. It bounces too much. There's no structural integrity. So that thing that was made out of rubber in the middle, we need some more balance. We need some more structure. So we're not going to let you make that out of rubber anymore. We're going to put a plywood strip along the middle of that so that it can be strong. I didn't get the bounce anymore. It's not doing what it's supposed to do, but we certainly have equilibrium. We've got structure. Do you see that that could be a problem? Okay, so we saw that that didn't work, and that other group of people out there that are saying, Jack Welch said if the rate of change outside the organization is faster than the rate of change in the outside, the end is in sight. We need movement. We need response. You know, put that rubber thing back in the middle. And oh, by the way, that's too strong. We need even more bounce. So let's make that structural framework made out of rubber. You know, and it's like now that it completely falls apart. I go through the bottom of it, and I still can't do what I'm supposed to do. Where do we play that out? And that's a characteristic of an open system, is that it has to have enough structure to let it structurally stay alive, enough substance in the orders, the rules, the regulations, the processes, but enough dreams and response to the world out there that it's living out there. I'm not even going to go into the last one. I just want to throw this word to you and let you do your own exploration. But there is a concept called entropy. I'm going to just a little bit, okay? Think about this from a biological perspective and what you need to eat and what you need not to eat if you're going to stay alive, and calories. If you're burning 1,500 calories a day in your life, right, and you're putting in only 500 calories, at what point does this become problematic for you, right? It's usually the other way around. If you're burning 1,500 calories a day, most of us are putting on about 3,000 or 4,000 calories of food. Now, what's the difference between putting on 3,000 or 4,000 calories of food and only burning 1,500 of it? Eventually, that doesn't work. And so this word called entropy, or what some people might call negative entropy, depending on your awareness of physics and chemistry and biology, means that a system has to bring enough energy into it to do what it's supposed to do. And for you and me, that might be X. But for an athlete who is burning more calories, right, they need to bring more in and then still have enough to sleep or rest or just live. Because if they bring in only enough to do what they burned up, they're in trouble later on. So the rule is, for a company of people or a biological thing, is that you got to bring enough energy into it to do what you're supposed to do and have a little bit left over. Because if you don't have any, it sounds like contingency funds to me, you know, that kind of thing. That's enough. Have a good week. I'll see you online. I'll get papers from you in a few days. We'll see you. Questions or closing comments? Hang on, I'll catch you in a minute, but is that a question for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just ask about the last article.
We just didn't get that far.
Yeah.
So
we like